This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It is 4 minutes after 10, and it is, I don't know, is it the biggest, the best example yet of how bonkers everything has become? Who do you rely on for information? The people who have dedicated their lives to trying to secure it, or the people proven repeatedly and incontrovertibly to lie like it's going out of fashion? I'm probably going to pronounce it wrong. Lügenpresse? Is it Lügenpresse? Listening to Donald Trump a moment ago describing various news organizations in the United States as scum was quite a moment, wasn't it? I mean, he's done it all before, but possibly not at a NATO summit. Listing any organisation still dedicated to trying to sift the facts or separate the fiction from the facts, or, of course, alternative facts, as Donald Trump and his acolytes prefer to call fiction. It brought that phrase back to mind for me. It became popular, I think, in 19th century Germany, but it was one of the ways in which Hitler persuaded the German people that up was down, that black was white, that 7 million people, mostly Jews, deserved to be exterminated. That's how you do it, by persuading people to believe lies and to ignore the truth. And, of course, the question very simply of whether or not the UK should be supportive of this action by Donald Trump is, I mean, it's almost impossible to express what a ridiculous question that is. Did we learn nothing from Iraq? If you can go to war on false intelligence and end up looking stupid and being responsible, in the case of the politicians that led us there, for the rise of ISIS and God knows how many miserable, hideous atrocities visited upon Western countries, then you'd have thought this time round, as they prepare to drop missiles again with a less stable president than last time on a Middle Eastern country in exactly the same part of the world, you'd have thought that the importance of intelligence would have been higher than ever, wouldn't you? Oh, man. You'd have thought now, given what we know, that the expertise of the intelligence community would be more important than ever before. But what do we have instead? What do we have instead? We have, a man who claims that he won an election that he lost, flanked by a defence secretary whose previous contributions to public discourse consisted of presenting gigs on Fox News, and whose personal life reads like a sort of 1970s potboiler novel. Anybody qualified, anybody remotely competent has been completely removed from the power structure. People like Fiona Hill, the Russia expert, who was at least able to urge caution last time round, they have all been completely removed. It is an administration consisting entirely of cronies, and the reason why he can't have anybody competent around him is because they would apply even the vaguest pressure on his posturing, on his lies. I mean, you hesitate, even if you're as clear-eyed as we are, you sort of hesitate to describe what we witnessed this morning in the terms that it demands, because it's still the President of the United States. Mark Rutte, I don't know if he was expecting his sycophantic message to be publicised, but he's doing a Keir Starmer. And I'm not sure they have any choice but to try to mollify the man-child. Do they have any choice? That might well be the phone-in today. You have to try to mollify the man-child, even when it involves broadcasting, accepting, congratulating him on a failure. How do you know it's a failure? Because the US intelligence community says so. In fact, we got there first, didn't we, on this programme? I think it was Balama who rang in and said that he was a little bit confused as to why Israel had already returned to the sites of the US attacks if they had been so successful. I probably should have paid even more attention than we usually do to Balama. But there it is. I mean, the intelligence community in the US now confirming that it was not a success. Who said it? Why did he use the word obliterate before there was any information coming in at all? I told you yesterday, because he needs to write the alternative reality. He thinks, with some justification, he thinks he can make the untrue true simply by repeating it so insistently that many people end up believing that it must be true, even though their eyes and their ears tell them that it's not. And you don't need me to remind you of that classic line from 1984 by George Orwell, that the final act, the worst act of all, was when they told you to ignore the evidence of your eyes and ears. And that's what he's doing every single day. You can't do it without attacking the media, so he's attacked the media. I don't know whether Rutte and Starmer have any choice. I mean, at least the Labour government has found the cojones on this occasion to refuse to actually support an action that has yet to be justified. That the existence of enriched uranium doesn't justify the attacks upon Iran. It would be the proximity to turning it into a bomb, something that has not been proven, and something which, again, his own intelligence community said categorically was not the case. His own director of national intelligence. You think I exaggerate sometimes when I talk about the scale of the lie. His own director of national intelligence says there was no truth in the claim that they were about to create a bomb. Benjamin Netanyahu had been making the same claim since 1992. You can be in favour of removing enriched uranium from Iran, but then, I mean, you'd have to explain to me why you're not also in favour of removing actual nuclear bombs from Israel, which refuses to sign up to any of the international proliferation treaties. It's one of those mornings, and I'm so glad that we get to spend them together, because otherwise I shall go mad, Horatio. It's one of those mornings where you simultaneously note the sheer scale of the takeover, the abandonment of truth, the rejection of reality, and you also still marvel at it. You also think it can't quite be true. So I sit here, I'm prepared to come on air, watching that press conference, the NATO press conference, and I mean, yesterday he used the F word to describe Israel and Iran in public. It's as if the boundaries of normality have been completely destroyed now. The parameters of civilized behaviour have been completely destroyed. Attacking journalists, some of whom will be risking their lives in war-torn countries and various trouble spots at the moment. Donald Trump, who invented a medical condition to avoid service in the Iran war, criticising, calling people who risked their lives to provide the public with the truth about things, calling them scum. Quite incredible. And you sit there and you wonder whether you're the one that is watching alternative reality. You wonder whether you're the one that is sort of missing something, and then he'll say something so categorically and obviously untrue that you are reminded once again that, again, to quote George Orwell, who is very, very relevant at the moment, I have to tell you, not least on the refugee question, which we haven't talked about for a while, but to quote George Orwell, if you can hold on to the truth, even if you are the only one, you will not go mad. So who do you, I mean, see, the problem we have, again, is if you think about the questions that are thrown up by the events of this morning, if you're going to spend 30 seconds thinking about it rather than just sort of reaching immediately for a Sun-style hotline, then the questions actually illustrate the madness of the moment. So who do you trust more? Donald Trump, who lies about everything, or the US intelligence community? I can't ask that question. It's stupid. It would be like asking, who do you trust more? David Attenborough or the flat earthers? Just for the avoidance of doubt in this scenario, the flat earthers represent Donald Trump and his acolytes. Who do you trust more? The people who say the earth is flat, do not at me to tell me that the earth is flat. Seriously, I'll ban you from the programme forever, even if it's in jest. Who do you trust more? 0345, the flat earthers or David Attenborough? NASA. Who do you trust more? Oh, Donald Trump, definitely. Yay. Woohoo. He's great. And I just don't know. They all know, by the way. Mark Rutte, I imagine, will be a little dismayed that his message has been made public. But at the same time, he sent it for one reason and one reason only. Their nightmare at the moment is for Trump to either denigrate or even withdraw from NATO. So they are tickling his toes. Keir Starmer has brought forward, I don't know if you know this, the state visit, reportedly against the wishes of King Charles. And he has done so in the hope of keeping Donald Trump sweet. I don't think that works. But think that's a very sort of subjective position. I just don't think he possesses a concept of credit. This is my thought for the day, by the way. If you think of a reservoir of goodwill, I don't think Trump has the capacity for it. It cuts both ways. It means that if you are buttering him up, if you're cozying up to him, if you're sucking up to him today in the hope of being treated more favourably tomorrow, then you are wasting your time. There is no point sending him sycophantic messages about what a great success this attack upon Iran was, even as the US intelligence community reveals that it wasn't. You're doing it, well, I mean, it may be that you're just doing it to get through the next 24-hour news cycle, which is all that Donald Trump cares about. And what you don't want to happen in the next 24-hour news cycle is for him to denigrate or, God forbid, threaten to withdraw from NATO. So you don't store up any credit, I don't think. And the converse of that is that you can be his sworn enemy today and his best friend tomorrow. There's no moral compass. There's no reservoir of goodwill or even ill will, because he's utterly devoid of what we would consider to be traditional morality. It's how he can be vile, hideously vile, to Volodymyr Zelensky in the Oval Office, and then today at the NATO meeting at The Hague, he will be glad handing him and Zelensky has no choice but to go along with it. It's the thing about power, isn't it? It debases the people that hold it. If they allow themselves to be debased, it debases everyone around them. Zelensky is surely one of the most principled world leaders, or at least one of the most impressive and courageous world leaders that we've seen in our lifetime. Zelensky has to stand there and be abused by Donald Trump and his idiot acolytes. He has to, because of the balance of power in the world. And today at The Hague, he'll have to glad hand him. He may even have to say nice things about him. The media still doesn't know how to handle this, but other world leaders, whether it's the head of NATO, Mark Rutte, or whether it's Keir Starmer, adopting a different path from some other European leaders because they have to, because we're so incredibly weakened by Brexit. We no longer move as part of a meaningful bloc. We're this sort of lonely little island, desperately trying to punch above its weight. But what else can they do? Rutte has to suck up to him because he needs to keep NATO intact. Starmer has to suck up to him because of the power Trump can wield over what's left of our international trade or our own situations. And I honestly don't know whether or not they have any choice at all. Sorry, I've got quite a lot to say today. I didn't think I was going to. I haven't even played the footage or the recording of that report. But the question I think that we'll ask at the end of it is whether or not do you know what I'd do if this was like a symposium? Does the media have to go along with this in the way that it does? Do the journalists that are present, who was the pushiest, who was the most vocal, who actually said this isn't true, this isn't reality, this has been denied by everybody? They kind of almost get into the room and start and become infected by the alternative facts. But I don't think that's an interesting phone-in for our purposes. I think what I want you to tell me is whether or not the sycophancy is inevitable and necessary, and therefore the right thing to do. And I'll be sharing some examples of the sycophancy after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
And of course, I mean, the lies don't matter until they matter. The lies about the 2020 election, they don't matter. Nothing changed. He got re-elected. Well, what if it had succeeded? What if the insurrection on January the 6th had succeeded in murdering Mike Pence, in sort of overthrowing the seat of power at the Capitol, the mob that was unleashed upon the Capitol by Donald Trump and his lies? I mean, how much would that have mattered? Where would we be now? We'd probably be at the sequel to the Hunger Games already. And these lies, my campaign has been a huge success. No, it hasn't. Unfortunately, I'm the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, or I'm the head of NATO, so I kind of have to go along at least a little bit with it. But we're not going to stoop to pretending that we can be in favour of something that we haven't seen the justification for. It's madness. But is the sycophancy necessary? Have a listen to just how crazy things have become. Remember that the US intelligence community not only established that Iran was no closer to creating a nuclear weapon than it has been since Benjamin Netanyahu first started claiming that it was going to happen tomorrow, but also that they will have been the best qualified people on the planet to establish the impact, the success or otherwise of the missile attacks upon Iran's nuclear facilities that were unleashed at the weekend.
Mr. President, what's your reaction to the intelligence reports saying that the Iranian nuclear sites were only partially devastated, not entirely?
Yeah, well, they said it was actually, the report said it could have been they don't know. I mean, they did a report. I could have Pete talk to it because his department did the report.
Just rewind that again. Listen to this. There's two things that you need to pick up on this. You need to pick up on the absolute intellectual chaos, the complete absence of coherence and cogency, but also the growing sense of palpable panic as the discussion went on. So take it from the top. That's the first lie. They said it could have been amazing. So we're supposed to trust the intelligence because it said, well, anyway, you listen again.
Mr. President, what's your reaction to the intelligence reports saying that the Iranian nuclear sites were only partially devastated, not entirely?
Yeah, well, they said it was actually, the report said it could have been they don't know. I mean, they did a report. I could have Pete talk to it because his department did the report. They really don't know. I think Israel's going to be telling us very soon because Bibi is going to have people
gibberish
involved in that whole situation. We hear it was obliteration. It was a virtual obliteration. When you take a look at the ground above, don't forget the flame is all underground. But everything above, if you look at the before and the after picture, everything above is burned black. The trees, everything. There's one building, but that's a building that sunk substantially into the ground.
Anyone want to take a guess on why the facilities are buried deep underground?
I believe it was total obliteration. I believe they didn't have a chance to get anything out because we acted fast. If it would have taken 2 weeks maybe, but it's very hard to remove that kind of material. Very hard and very dangerous for them to remove it. Plus, they knew we were coming. And if they know we're coming, they're not going to be down there. There aren't too many people that are going to be down there. Pete, do you have something to say about that?
Well, Mr. President, when you talk to the people who built the bombs, understand what those bombs can do, and deliver those bombs, they landed precisely where they were supposed to, so it was a flawless mission.
Flawless.
Right down where we knew they needed to enter. And given the 30,000 pounds of explosives and capability of those munitions, it was devastation underneath Fordo. And the amount of munitions, 6 per location.
Sources?
Any assessment that tells you it was something otherwise is speculating with other motives. And we know that because when you actually look at the report, by the way, it was a top secret report, it was preliminary. It was low confidence. All right, so this is you make assessments based on what you know.
They said it could be very devastating, very serious.
Moderate to severe, and we believe far more likely severe and obliterated. So this is a political motive.
2 people have used the word obliterated.
Of course, we're doing a leak investigation with the FBI right now because this information is for internal purposes, battle damage assessments, and CNN and others are trying to spin it.
7 people briefed on the early intelligence assessments have confirmed that the core components of the country's nuclear program were not destroyed.
And CNN, which, as you know, very few people are watching.
Here it comes.
And you would think they'd do the opposite. You would think they'd want to say, this
Don't
was
like the message, shoot the messenger.
Success. And the thing that hurts me is it's really demeaning to the pilots and the people that put that whole thing together, the generals.
He really cares about the pilots.
It was a perfect operation. And when you look at the holes, and this was done from 52,000 feet, there was no moon, there was no light, and those 3 holes are right together. And also,
who knew
that
modern military technology
30 Tomahawks from submarines, in particular one submarine, but that was 400 miles away. And every one of those Tomahawks hit within a foot of where they were supposed to hit, took out a lot of buildings that Israel wasn't able to get. We took them out with Tomahawks. We don't even talk about that. This was a devastating attack, and it knocked them for a loop. And, if it didn't, they wouldn't have settled. If they had,
this is my favorite
if they had won, if we didn't take it out, they wouldn't have settled. Somebody mentioned that to me last night. If that thing wasn't devastated, they would have never settled.
Yeah, because if you've got nothing to lose, that's definitely the point at which you agree to a settlement.
That's the game these people play.
You agree to a settlement when you've got something to lose.
They characterize it the way they want it characterized, and they're leakers. This is the game they play. So that's
and here's
number
Marco
one.
Rubio, who is another perfect example of that thing I was talking about with regard to a reservoir of goodwill or ill will. It doesn't matter if Trump insults you in the most hideous ways. If you are sufficiently craven and morally corrupted or ambitious, which can sometimes be the same thing, you'll be back in favour tomorrow. And you may bear some grudge. You may struggle to contemplate your own reflection in the mirror because you can see what you've become. But hey, you're Secretary of State. That's a big job. You're a big success. Secretary of State for Defence. That's just extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary. Is the sycophancy necessary? I hope this doesn't turn out to be a rhetorical question. I'd love to hear some explanations as to why they don't have to behave like Mark Rutte behaved yesterday. And remember, his job is to keep NATO together. Donald Trump is on the record as contemplating the end of NATO, the withdrawal from NATO. And without the United States, NATO is no longer NATO.
Marco, can I just alert you to one other aspect? So the great thing is you took out the nuclear capability of Iran. This was crucial. You did it in a way which is extremely impressive. But the signal sends to the rest of the world that this president, when it comes to it, yes, he is a man of peace, but if necessary, he is willing to use strength, the enormous strength of the American military. So I think that signal to the rest of the world, this is far beyond Iran, is extremely important. So let me also point us to that aspect of what happens.
They went down, Iran went down to the site afterwards. They said it's so devastated, and they settled when they saw what we did to it. And frankly, if we didn't do that, they would have had a lot of ammunition to keep going. They wouldn't have settled.
I mean, maybe my brain is a bit slow on that one, but you'd have thought, wouldn't you, that if you've got something to protect, then you want the conflict to stop. If you've got nothing left to protect, maybe not, I don't know. But anyway, as Nikki points out, you're completely wrong, James. The trees were burned. What bit of that do you not understand? So that was Mark Rutte assuming the position. Here's a little reminder of what Keir Starmer sounded like in February.
And it is my pleasure to bring from His Majesty the King a letter. He sends his best wishes and his regards, of course, but he also asked me to bear this letter and bring it to you. So can I present the letter from the King to
you? Thank you very much. Am I supposed to read it right now?
Yeah, please do.
I will do.
I've got to tell him what your reaction is, so I need to know.
He is a great gentleman. A great gentleman. Oh, that's well. That is really nice. I must make sure his signature's on that. Otherwise, it's not quite as meaningful. It is, and that's quite a signature, isn't it? How beautiful.
This is a letter from His Majesty the King. It's an invitation for a second state visit. This is really special. This has never happened before. This is unprecedented. And I think that just symbolises the strength of the relationship between us. So this is a very special letter. I think the last state visit was a tremendous success.
It was.
His Majesty the King wants to make this even better than that. So this is truly historic. An unprecedented second state visit, and he wants to talk that through with you.
And that says at Windsor. That's really something.
Yes. What I haven't got yet is your answer. I do need to.
The answer is yes. On behalf of.
And there it is, the sort of proof positive that the UK Prime Minister and even the head of NATO have concluded that they have little choice but to mollify the man-child. To mollify the Mango Mussolini or whatever you prefer to call him. And it's funny, you feel a little bit inappropriate or a little bit unprofessional when you use phrases like that, or at least I still do, despite the language he uses to describe Israel and Iran yesterday was effing and jeffing, and of course scum now to describe every news organisation in the United States that is trying to tell the truth. But is there any choice? Is it, I mean, whether it works or not, is the sycophancy the only option when you're dealing with that level of narcissism, that level of self-obsession? I don't know, but it's time I took some calls. I will do after the very latest headlines with Thomas Watts.
James O'Brien on LBC.
32 is the time. Why should I? I don't have to. It's my show. Why should I take a call? I don't want it. Terry is in Sherwood, Oregon, in the United States of America. Terry, welcome. What made you pick up the phone this morning? Well, indeed, this evening.
Good morning,
Hello.
Mr. O'Brien. I greatly appreciate you taking the call. What made me take up the call is I see your programs on YouTube. I'm, of course, 8 hours 3 a.m. here.
Okay, sorry, your line went down briefly there. Let's hope it doesn't go down again. 3 a.m., carry on. So it is indeed good morning. And also good night.
Yes, good morning. Exactly, I've been up a long time. In any case, the question you have at hand is about whether or not there should be appeasement, as I'm seeing it. And the question is answered very clearly from history. You know, we don't need another Neville Chamberlain moment. Mark Rutte was buffoon, as I believe your PM was as well, because they're operating from a place of fear. However, we know that the person's MO, Taka, okay, we won't pull out of NATO. Why? Because it's bad for our defense industry. This is all about money. There's too many bribes and kickbacks in that chain already. They're not going to want to give that up. So NATO might feel some pressure where we might pull back, but it's not going to be something we pull out of. I mean, he can't do that, even right now where he is actually the dictator.
That's a bit contradictory. There's lots of things that I bet you would have said to me a year ago he could never do, or certainly 10 years ago no president could ever do, and then he went off and done them. Not least, of course, probably the biggest lie, the big beautiful lie about having won an election that he actually lost. You mean what I think you mean is that the vested interests, the sort of military establishment wouldn't let him pull out of NATO.
What I mean is that on your side of the Atlantic, you can't be afraid of that as a threat. You shouldn't take anything that he threatens you with as a determinant in your decisions.
And yet Mark Rutte clearly has. Mark Rutte clearly has.
Because many people are operating under the illusion that the United States of America is still a democracy. It's not. It's a failed democracy, and I'm living in it. We don't have a government. We have a regime. That regime is just built on greed, built on corruption. So in a certain manner of speaking, they don't have the power yet to change that inertia that's behind the system.
So what's the alternative to the sycophancy then? What's the alternative to the sycophancy?
The alternative is to be, as an American, rude in the way that Europeans can be rude to Americans.
Really?
As you used to be in the 70s, 80s, where you looked down on us unintelligent, deservedly, and did not entertain anything that we said because we were just a bunch of, as the French call it, grands enfants.
I don't know about that.
I lived in France for 3 years when I was young, and so.
Well, the French are still French. I mean, Emmanuel Macron has said that the airstrikes are illegal. And I mean, maybe you can say that. I don't think I'll join in. But Macron's ability to describe the airstrikes as illegal speaks to a strength that the UK doesn't have anymore, because we walk alone, and therefore Keir Starmer feels the need to build bridges with Donald Trump, even as I think everybody recognises you can build a bridge today, but he will quite happily, without a backwards glance, blow it up tomorrow.
And that's not because he wants to be famous or infamous. It's just he wants everybody's attention.
In that moment.
Always, all the time. And the thing that is the trick is to ignore him.
What do you feel when you listen to your president conducting a press conference like the one you heard this morning?
I don't. I only read a transcript later. I can't stand to look or hear the creature. I won't speak his name. It is synonymous with the most vile things in humanity. It is treachery. It is treason. I believe our democracy has been usurped by a conspiracy. Now, that sounds hyperbolic. However, I'm living the experience.
You are, and yet you're...
And here in America, there are so many things that are not being reported in the mainstream media that we know because anecdotally, we have friends who experienced it. We have trusted confidants that we can communicate with directly. There's a lot of crap going on that's not being reported.
And I mean, it makes
this... At this point, 120,000 people have been disappeared in the United States.
Well, I was going to say, it makes the stuff that is being reported the tip of the iceberg. The thing that I personally find hardest to process is the sight of masked men with no apparent mandate. I don't know who's running ICE. Do you know who's running ICE? Do you know where they take their orders from?
Kristi Noem is the director of the DHS. However, more than likely they're taking the directions directly from Stephen Miller, who is the coordinator of the non-governmental organizations here, white power, religious zealots, militias that are now filling those roles.
And you see the sort of, for want of a better word, Terry, because it's not acceptable, as you've just highlighted, you see the acceptable face of the process at the press conference today, where he knows he can't answer these questions beyond a few attacks upon the media and a little bit of bluster, so he has to have everybody sitting alongside him to bring them in to essentially repeat his lies and add even more speculation. Thank you, Terry. Time for bed, I think. But thank you for staying up to talk to me. 10:38 is the time. Sean is in Ilford. Sean, what's going on?
Hi, good morning, James. So nice to talk to you after such a long time. I listen to you every day.
Well, thank you. Fail. You'd be careful. You can have too much of a good thing, Sean. Carry on. What would you like to say?
Well, I wanted to say really that it is absolutely sickening to listen to these people, these sycophants, suck up to Trump, but they have absolutely no alternative. He is one of the most powerful persons, and he is unpredictable. He's a lunatic. So they do what they think pleases him most, and it does. When you suck up to him and you please him, and you are the greatest. This, you are the great. It pleases him no amount, and he loves that kind of stuff. And the other thing I want to say,
but this is, I think I agree with you. Certainly, the weaker the position you're in, the more necessary it becomes to behave in the way that we've seen Starmer and now Rutte behave. Terry made some very, very good points. Not least the point that it's pointless. Well, I mean, we might conclude that you have no choice but to behave like this, but all it ever achieves is a reprieve. You can't be his friend. He's incapable of normal emotion. So however hard you suck up to him today, tomorrow, the next day, by the weekend, he could quite happily stab you in the front again. Do you see what I mean?
Absolutely. Oh, yes, absolutely. They're not. But these leaders know, Starmer knows, all the leaders in the country and the world that deal with him know that he is unpredictable. He's likely to turn and stab you. He's likely to turn around and call you an idiot. I mean, one minute he loves you, the next minute he hates you.
Yeah. He's like coercive control, isn't it? It's like an abusive partner.
Yeah, but we have to suffer him for the next 4 years. We have no alternative. We really have no alternative but to live by his... but at least people are watching him and are questioning him.
Are they, though? Some people will watch that and then just start wanging on about why Keir Starmer hasn't offered his full-throated support to a military adventure that is yet to be justified and probably failed. I mean, I don't know that enough people do respond intelligently to what we are witnessing, what we're seeing. The media kind of... This isn't a criticism of anybody, because if you want to be in that room, you have to adopt certain policies, you have to adopt a certain approach, and you have to treat him like he's normal. And if the media treats him like he's normal, even CNN treats him like he's normal, as he attacks them in language that is very reminiscent of 1930s Germany. But if the media have to treat him like he's normal, because I can't see what the alternative is, then significant swathes of the public, even if they're not thinking about it a lot, will absorb the idea that he is normal. And if he's normal, he could be telling the truth.
I do not really think, James, I don't agree that people think he's normal. I don't think there are many people who think he
won an election. He won an election when everybody already knew what he was like. And they liked it.
But
sorry, I think you'd forgotten that. I apologise for reminding you.
But he promised them things that he was going to do,
true.
which he's not doing. I mean, but earlier on in the program, you questioned as to why he is denying the report about the effectiveness of the bombing of these silos. Well, I think he has no alternative. He doesn't want to go and revisit that again. He doesn't want to. These bombs cost a fortune, and he doesn't really believe that Iran is capable or is going to make a nuclear bomb or use it, even if maybe as a deterrent. But I don't think he wants to go and start this thing again. That's why he keeps on saying it's very effective.
Obliterated.
Yeah, the only reason he says he's obliterated is, and the only reason he actually bombed was to get Netanyahu off his back.
Well, I think the New York Times have put forward, I find, a slightly more compelling analysis of that. Netanyahu's been calling for this since the US had finished bombing Iraq. He wanted them to start bombing Iran. I think it's more than possible that he just responded to the very, very, very positive PR Netanyahu was getting from Fox News and others, and decided that he wanted a piece of that particular pie for himself. And we're back to the 24-hour cycle. We're back to the news cycle. What happens next doesn't matter. I got patted on the back, including by the head of NATO. It was brilliant. If the intelligence changes, you can change your mind. If it turns out that it was a huge success, if proof is provided that Iran was on the brink of preparing a nuclear weapon, then you would be entitled to change your mind. But he is already hoovering up support and hoovering up plaudits, despite the fact that the facts appear to completely contradict the narrative that he has bought into. And, again, to refer back to a caller earlier this week, the ability to create a hideous weapon is already there. If Iran wanted to create a dirty bomb, as they're called, it has the material with which to do that. So, the idea that they're waiting until they've got a kind of textbook nuclear weapon while simultaneously sponsoring terrorism, if they wanted to unleash a hideous weapon upon Israel or anywhere else in the world, they already possess the capability to do that. And if the reports about what's happened to the enriched uranium are correct, that capability has not been compromised. The mission was a failure, just like the 2020 election result was a victory for Joe Biden. The facts are right in front of us. They're 20 feet high. And yet, or the facts according to the knowledge that we have, of course. If it changes, then you can change your mind. But as it is now, Trump is selling a narrative, selling a version of events which is completely at odds with all of the available evidence. And that's why I find it so extraordinary, even now, to watch previously reputable leaders, and I think still reputable leaders who know what the truth is, leaders who know the difference between the truth and the lie, going along with his nonsense. And that's why the question I'm asking today, if you're just joining us, is whether or not they have any choice, particularly somebody like Keir Starmer, who, through no fault of his own, is leading a country that has no strength in numbers, that has no membership of international blocks that might be able to pose a meaningful pushback to President Trump. It's 10:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
48 is the time. Where does the time go? This from Marita. He's just trying to save face. Imagine you're China or Russia watching this reality TV show. Trump literally has no option but to continue the lie. Look, if the intelligence is correct and it's largely a failure, would Donald Trump ever, in any circumstances, say so? I just think about that, even if you still love the guy. Admittedly, you're unlikely to be listening to this programme. But you never know. You might have accidentally stayed tuned. So if it had been a failure, do you think he would tell you the truth? Bearing in mind how he deals with lost elections, a failed military exercise, a failed military mission, would he tell you the truth? That's the problem that we have, because sometimes it will be true. The thing he wants to happen will happen. So he will describe something that has happened, and it will actually have happened. But he will always describe what he wanted to happen, regardless of what actually happened. This is the disconnect from reality that makes trying to analyse him almost certainly pointless. But we have little choice. So if the intelligence that we are aware of is correct, is borne out by future revelation, future reportage, then do you think Donald Trump will ever turn around and say that was a big mistake? Has he ever admitted? Has he ever done anything wrong? It's not a rhetorical question. I'd be interested in examples. I'll share them. Has he ever admitted to making a mistake? Has he ever said, "Oh, that was," or something that he didn't want to happen happened? If you tell him something he doesn't want to hear, he'll call it fake news. Doesn't matter whether it's true or not. If you carry on insisting that it's true, he'll attack the people that have done the reporting. He'll attack the journalists. He'll pursue the Lügenpresse narrative. So if he has genuinely messed up or failed, would he ever tell you? All right, so that is a rhetorical question, I think, unless you can come up with a better example. Elizabeth is in Kiel in Germany. Elizabeth, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. This is actually my first time ever calling in to a radio show, so thank you.
I'm honoured.
I really love your show, and you're actually one of the few news sources that I actually listen to here in Germany in English for what's going on both in the UK and at home in the US.
Gosh, thank you very much.
But just to go back to that point, I'm really from New York City. I'm from Queens, New York, and I've heard of Donald Trump all of my life. Yeah. So I've never heard him ever come out and say that he was at fault for anything. There's never been one time, even with all the lawsuits and bankruptcies, that he's ever come out, or any of his spokespeople ever came out saying, this was an error. He will take responsibility for these actions. Never. But back to your original point.
Well, you know better than I do, but unless someone comes up with some evidence, Elizabeth, we're going to have to conclude he is incapable of acknowledging error.
I agree. But to go back to your original point regarding, world leaders standing up to Donald Trump, I really do believe that they should. And hear me out, because when Mark Carney was in the White House, a month ago, I believe, the way he approached Trump and the way that he approached the administration, I believe, was just fantastic. He listened, but then he stood his ground. And Trump is a bully. Trump is a New York bully, right? And his goons are also bullies. The best way to stand up to a bully is by standing up to a bully. And that is exactly what Mark Carney did. Friedrich Merz, when he was there, at that point, the focus wasn't really on Merz, but his little pushback with, giving Donald Trump that birth certificate of his grandfather, who himself was a German immigrant, was his way of standing up. And if you've noticed, Trump really hasn't talked anything about Germany, or he really stopped with the 51st state regarding Carney. So this administration that he currently has, they're all yes people, and they're afraid to stand up. With the first administration, these were people who were politicians, who were generals, who knew exactly what they were doing, how government was going. And so when Trump would come in with, his idiotic ideas, there was pushback.
Yeah.
And you don't see that now with this administration.
I hadn't thought of that. In a way, Bruce said about half an hour ago, this is not the way to respond to bullies, and I've got it clicked to come back to later, but it seems the perfect time to come to it now. And if the bully knows that he's got you on the run, got you on the ropes, you will potentially attract more attention than the person who has successfully repelled the bully. So Starmer, and now quite possibly Mark Rutte, have put themselves at Donald Trump's mercy in a way that Mark Carney and Emmanuel Macron have not.
Correct. And I don't know so much about Keir Starmer at the moment, because obviously I'm not in the UK.
Sure.
But from what I've seen, especially in interviews and the way he's approached Trump and the way he, was coddling to Trump when he was at the White House, it was embarrassing. For me, when you have pride in your country as the leader, then you need to show that, and you need to stand up to that bully that's trying to put you down, and also that's disrespecting your country.
And repeatedly. So, and bringing the king into it as well, and also, if I were to make the argument now that we have little choice whether you want to bring Brexit into it or not, than to pursue trade agreements with the United States of America that we don't currently have, and he's done a lap of honour about that. You of course would remind me that trade agreements with the Trump administration aren't worth the paper that they're written on. He'll tear them up tomorrow if he thinks it will suit him.
I agree.
I think he's done that with Mexico, hasn't he? He tore up the agreement with Mexico while the ink was still drying, and that's a bit of a stretch. I think it took 4 or 5 years for him to do so. But it's still, what is the point of? And earlier caller used the word, a fellow American actually used the word appeasement. What is the point of appeasing somebody? To which I think historically the answer is, if they have all the power, then you have no choice but to appease them. But people like Mark Carney and Emmanuel Macron and Friedrich Merz show us that actually you do have an alternative.
You do. And for me, the approach that Merz is doing, or that the EU is doing, is distancing itself slowly away from the United States and hopefully making the EU stronger as a collective, not individually, right?
Yes.
it will work. But my problem that I have is like that they're coddling to a child.
Yeah.
And this man-child, or as one of my favorite podcasters call him, a titty baby.
I hope that's an acceptable phrase. I think I'm the only one paying attention at the moment. But if anybody finds that offensive, then I do apologise. But it is. I know what you mean. No, I think we have an English, British equivalent. But carry on. Coddling
but at the
him.
Same time,
yes.
Yeah, but at the same time, you cannot coddle an adult.
No.
This is not a child, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You need to stand up to him, and if he's not listening, then you form your own coalition or your own forms of... oh my God, I'm drawing a blank.
No,
You're
not. But the coddling of a child is designed to mould the personality of the child. It's designed. It has a long-term plan. There's no long-term plan if it's an adult that you are treating in that fashion. You're just literally trying to avoid the next tantrum in full knowledge that the tantrum will come.
And as you can see, it's not working out.
It's really not working.
He's always going to come out with a new tantrum all the time.
Yeah. And a new target, again, and a new set of lies to pretend that the truth is not the truth, and that his version of events is the correct one. Elizabeth, thank you. Can I ask, did you enjoy your debut on radio?
I did. I thought I was going to be more nervous than I was, but this was pretty chill.
You were brilliant, and it's a real pleasure to have you. I hope it's not the last as well as the first appearance. 10:57 is the time. Unbelievable, isn't it? Mike is in Marlow. Mike, what made you pick up the phone?
Yeah, good morning. I've just been watching Trump on Sky News, and they're all sucking up to him.
Yes.
And nobody's actually argued with him about, the effectiveness of these strikes.
Well, he was asked. Journalists did ask him, and he just... he just claimed that he knows better than the intelligence agencies without providing any proof or evidence, and then he got Pete Hegseth to stand up and agree with him without any proof or evidence.
Like he's going to disagree with him.
Yeah.
But the simple truth of the matter is they want him on side. So they're all playing the game. They're all boosting his ego. They're all sucking up to him.
But do they have any choice? Do they have any choice?
Well, not if you want to keep him on board.
There it is. And that puts you and Elizabeth almost on different sides of the ping-pong table because, a Mark Carney hasn't prioritised keeping him sweet. Emmanuel...
No, but NATO need to, don't they?
I think NATO do need to, yes. I think NATO do need to. Although Terry in the States, our first caller today, suggested that there is no likelihood of him withdrawing from NATO. It's not a risk Mark Rutte can afford to take, really, is it?
No, I know, but they need his money. They need his weight.
America.
They need him on
States,
side. Yeah, it's as simple as that.
I don't know that we have cut through the noise today, Mike. I don't know that I'm any clearer on whether or not it's necessary or not, because I'd make a pendulum. Well, listening to Elizabeth, I'm thinking, yay, she's right. But listening to you, I'm thinking, actually, maybe NATO is a different proposition from a leader. If we were to confine the conversation to Starmer, we would probably say a little bit more safely that he didn't have to adopt the sycophantic approach that he adopted. But remember, he's been... threatened from the right. He's been threatened not by the Conservative Party, but by the fantasy politics of Nigel Farage, who's made great political capital out of his proximity to Donald Trump. So I think Starmer's possibly trying to shoot two foxes at the same time and possibly missing them both. It's coming up to 11 o'clock. Speaking of Keir Starmer, he's got some serious problems, I think, with this welfare bill. And it's time we talked about it. What I would urge you to do, and you may disagree, is imagine it was the Tories doing it and base your response on that.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 3 minutes after 11 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. You know how I wang on about footballification. It is, if you're new to the theory, it's the idea that occurred to me once when I was watching a game of football on the television. I didn't have any skin in the game. My team wasn't playing, but I was struck anew, because I've seen it a million times, by the absolute ferocity on the faces of opposing fans as a footballer went to take a corner where they were sitting in their bit of the stadium. And it was, I mean, you've seen it. You don't need me to tell you. It was absolutely contorted hatred. Extraordinary. As a Kidderminster Harriers fan, with the possible exception of Telford United, we don't generally indulge in that level of negativity, although I came close at the end of last season when we saw glory slip through our fingers at the very last minute. But it struck me that when you're in that space, when you're in that sort of tribal fury, then your lot can't do anything wrong. It is impossible to... Hey, crikey, any echoes of what we were saying about Donald Trump a moment ago? Someone check ChatGPT for examples of him admitting that he had actually made mistakes. And spoiler alert, there are a couple, so I shall share those with you, hopefully, in the course of this hour. I mean, the bad news is, looking at them, they're not necessarily mistakes or apologies that he would admit to now that his power is almost untrammeled. But we'll run through it shortly. Thank you to Rob for that. 5 minutes after 11 is the time. So when you're in that space of uncontrollable, I think that's the point, uncontrollable tribal fury, your lot can do no wrong and the other lot can do no right. So if your centre forward ghosts into the box and gets both his legs broken, then obviously you're going to be furious. But if your centre forward ghosts into the box and breaks both the legs of a defender, you're going to be adamant that the centre forward has done nothing wrong. And ditto, if they score an amazing goal, it will be offside or they will have cheated. But most obviously on fouls. That was not a foul. Even if you could hear the cracking bone from row Z, you would be adamant that he's faking it. It's not true. And there's a little bit of that in all of us. There's an awful lot of it in some of us, but there's a little bit of it in all of us. I don't think anyone's going to be particularly shocked to discover that I think the government that we currently have is considerably better than any of the available alternatives. Keir Starmer is in many ways disappointing people that supported him, but he is governing in a world that exists. Governing badly, perhaps, in a world that exists is preferable to governing in a world that doesn't exist. Theresa May, compelled by circumstances to govern in a fantasy world, a world where Brexit was not a disastrous idea. Boris Johnson has lived his entire life in a fantasy world. And despite having a fairly good vocabulary, I don't have the words to describe the scale of the delusion under which Liz Truss tried to govern this country. I think history might be quite kind to Rishi Sunak. And Eat Out to Help Out and a couple of other egregious missteps notwithstanding, I think that he tried to govern, albeit he led an ungovernable party that had recently put Liz Truss in Downing Street. I think Rishi Sunak tried to govern in a world that actually exists. But Keir Starmer categorically arrived in Downing Street determined to actually reflect reality and govern in a world that exists. And it is a world in which the welfare system is widely regarded to have run out of control. And it is a world in which every single time the Tories sought to cut people's welfare payments, they seemed to be coming from a place of cruelty. They seemed to me, and this could be footballification, that's why I'm putting my hands up early, they seemed to me to be motivated by malice or misinformation or both. You know, when you hear them talking about mental health as if it's some sort of lifestyle choice, you know that if you can find some examples where that slur may hold true, you're completely ignoring the massive majority of people with poor mental health who would give their eye teeth not to have poor mental health. Similarly with unemployment, the idea that people are opting in their millions to lead lives of inactivity seems to me fanciful. There will be some, and you certainly can collect a sort of raft of payments if you're poorly enough and possessed of the requisite number of children and the rest of it. You can accrue a sum that looks attractive to outsiders, and maybe, but if you let your thinking be led by those extremities, you ignore, again, everybody in the middle, everybody who is in good faith, everybody who would give their eye teeth not to have a disability. So the sickness-related benefits payments, the cuts to disability and sickness-related benefits payments are designed to save £5 billion a year by 2030. Let's give you the numbers before we look at the opinions. More than 130 MPs, including 122 Labour, and that is notes I have from before I came on air, but I think the figure probably still holds true, have signed an amendment that would give them the opportunity to vote on a proposal to reject these plans. I think it's panic stations. Cabinet ministers ringing around Labour MPs, asking them to remove their names from the amendment. I saw one report last night, I hope I didn't misread it, that they'd suggested this might become a vote of no confidence in Keir Starmer, and the number of people on the list actually went up. But Starmer is currently sticking to his guns. This is the problem with U-turns, isn't it? Is once you've undertaken one U-turn, then you've created the idea that you're going to be more likely to undertake another than you would have done previously. That's why I said at the time when we were talking about Starmer's U-turn on winter fuel payments, as I talked about the wisdom in some ways of Margaret Thatcher's position. It looks like good leadership. To refuse ever to undertake any U-turns, as she famously did, because it minimises criticism. What's the point of putting a petition together? What's the point of getting an amendment on the books? What's the point of putting huge effort into trying to get them to change their mind if you know they never will, if they've gone on the record as saying they never will? So on the one hand, it's stupid because what is the point of having a mind if you never change it? What is the point of facts and evidence if you don't change your views when the facts and evidence changes? But on the other, if you make it clear that you're never going to do a U-turn, then people probably won't bother trying to make you do a U-turn. I don't know where this story fits into that analysis, but they are trying to make him do a U-turn, and he is insisting that he will not. Have a listen to Keir Starmer talking to LBC's Natasha Clark in The Hague at that NATO meeting earlier today.
The welfare system was broken by the Tories in their 14 years in power. We were elected in to mend it. It doesn't work for anyone. It traps people in a position where they can't get into work. In fact, it's counterproductive. It works against them getting into work. So we have to reform it. That is a Labour argument. It's a progressive argument. And we need to make sure that the welfare system is there not just for today, but for the future. So we need to change it to make sure we have the welfare system we need for the future. And that's the change we'll bring about.
So definitely vote on Tuesday?
There'll be a vote on Tuesday, and we're going to make sure that we reform the welfare system.
And, I mean, it's a real possibility that they'll lose it. So I'm going to probably play you that clip again because it was quite substantive, oddly, for a politician. There was detail in there. But the takeaway line, I think, the headline is that this is a Labour proposal. The idea that £5 billion worth of disability and sickness-related benefits are currently making their way into the pockets of people who don't need them offends me. And this is where footballification kicks in. I can't. Well, Nathan thinks I can. He writes, I don't think footballification works in this situation, James. We've had 14 years of past results and cruelty to judge the Tories on. I'm hoping, and I think that, there's a genuine reason for the reform of the welfare bill, and it will ultimately help people. Well, 122 Labour MPs appear currently to disagree. And I'm minded to agree with them. Either, and this is such an obvious cop-out, the communications are once again appalling, or £5 billion worth of payments, so countless people with disabilities who currently qualify for disability and sickness-related benefits in a system that has been notoriously difficult to navigate and far from generous for the last 14 years. The people who've survived that system are now being told they don't need or deserve £5 billion worth of welfare payments. So Nathan disagrees. A couple of other people do as well, actually. But I think, in fact, that can be part of our phone-in, can't it? We've been rather meta lately. I don't know if you've noticed. Someone was kind enough to point out that in much the way that the inimitable, the fantastic, the genius that is Stuart Lee now provides running commentary upon the nature of stand-up comedy while doing his award-winning stand-up comedy, so we now provide running commentary on the nature of radio phone-ins while conducting our largely non-award-winning radio phone-ins. So we might do that. We might ask that question of whether or not the footballification analysis fits here, whether or not you have to ask yourself how you'd feel if the Tories were doing this. I'm 52, 48. Forgive me. I think you do have to. Or am I falling into my own trap of saying you have to pick a side even if you haven't seen the reasoning, even if you haven't seen the balance? I do not know, but I do know this. There'll be lots of people listening to this who currently qualify for disability and sickness-related benefits. I don't like doing phone-ins that involve a variation on me asking how worried you are or how scared you are. But who do we trust on this? Who do we trust? Who really knows whether or not there's £5 billion worth of savings to be made? Have another quick listen. It's only a few seconds. It's only 30-odd seconds. I won't be too late for the break. But listen to the Prime Minister talking to Natasha earlier today.
The welfare system was broken by the Tories in their 14 years in power. We were elected in to mend it. It doesn't work for anyone. It traps people in a position where they can't get into work. In fact, it's counterproductive. It works against them getting into work. So we have to reform it. That is a Labour argument. It's a progressive argument. And we need to make sure that the welfare system is there not just for today, but for the future. So we need to change it to make sure we have the welfare system we need for the future. And that's the change we'll bring about.
So definitely vote on Tuesday?
There'll be a vote on Tuesday, and we're going to make sure that we reform the welfare system.
If it was headlined by the determination to help people not currently in work into work, I'd feel a lot more comfortable about this plan. And it may be that it is media framing of the £5 billion savings that have pushed the proposal to help people back into work out of focus or off the top of the story. But I don't look at the last 14 years in this country and think to myself that the Tories were overly generous, or the Tories made it easier for people to opt out of the workforce. And I could be wrong. I honestly don't think I am. And I'm not going to ask you on a scale of 1 to 10 how much we should hate this proposal, but I am going to ask you two questions. Number one, who do we trust? Who do we know? Who can tell us how fair this is, how right this is? 0345 60 973. And number two, is this too meta? Well, you tell me, actually. Is it right or wrong to say that you have to ask yourself how you'd feel if the Tories were introducing this? Or is that actually unhelpful because Labour are introducing it for very different reasons from the ones that the Tories might have offered when they called for £5 billion worth of welfare savings? 0345 60 60 973. How do we know? Who can we trust? Who do we turn to for a proper insight into whether or not this is a Labour policy or not? Labour Prime Minister says it is. 122 Labour MPs say it isn't. Who has the facts? Who's got the detail? Who really knows? I don't. Maybe I should, but I don't. That's what you're here for. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. And then, just in terms of political analysis, I find myself thinking this quite a lot lately. I mean, there are people who are never going to forgive Keir Starmer for winning an election. People on the left who are never going to forgive Keir Starmer for winning an election, who insist that he might as well be a Tory. I find that a fairly silly position, but when you look into the other positions held by people making that argument, you realise that their definition of silly is very different from your definition of silly. I'm possibly being swayed by that rhetoric, though. Is it correct to say that you need to ask yourself how you'd feel in order to decide what you think about this bill? You need to ask yourself what you'd think about it if the Tories had brought it in. Because if the Tories were suggesting £5 billion worth of cuts to disability and sickness-related benefits, I would be going nuts. And my head would have exploded. My conscience tells me that Labour will not be undertaking this out of cruelty. They will not be undertaking this out of callousness or a desperate appeal to the kind of people who talk about how nobody deserves any payments or welfare at all and everyone is swinging the lead. And I know they're all lying because my window cleaner's sister's mum goes to Benidorm for 7 months of the year while claiming that she's got emphysema. You know precisely the kind of rhetoric that I'm talking about. I don't, and this could make me a victim of footballification. This may be the sound of a scarf tightening around my own neck, but I can't believe at this point that a Labour government would introduce a policy like this from a position of cruelty, callousness or pandering to cruel people, to cruel pundits. But if 122 Labour MPs don't like it, it's highly likely I'm wrong. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need to help me decide how wrong I am or not.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 21 minutes after 11, and here it comes. More Labour MPs join the benefit revolt despite ministers' appeals. The first time I've seen plausible suggestions that Keir Starmer may be vulnerable, not just to defeat or to embarrassment, but possibly to replacement. Not in this cycle, not in this moment, but the first time I've heard the sound of knives being sharpened, politically speaking. And if it's true that they told MPs it was a vote of confidence and the number of people preparing to vote against went up, then yeah, there is a much bigger problem on the horizon than this individual bill contains. But let's find out. Rob's in Great Malvern. Rob, what would you like to say?
Oh, good morning, James.
Hello,
yes, it's about why I've been listening to the MPs speaking, and they've said that they've raised their concerns in private, and it's been a very big decision for them to sign this amendment.
Yes.
Now, they're not asking, ultimately, as you say, it probably will, as they're saying, kill the bill. What they're asking for is more time and more information. So the information that's been given out by Liz Kendall, it doesn't take into account migratory notices. That's one thing to point out. So people moving from ESA onto universal credit will bump the figures up. So the figures of UC and limited work capability and things like this, they would naturally go up because you've got 2 million people coming over roughly from ESA onto universal credit.
Okay.
So they're using those figures as on the projection. I haven't seen anything today that they've deleted those. Also, the fact that what I think the MPs want is more information. So in the reports of the people who will lose their PIP, the 4-point rule, and this seems to be the major sticking point, is that they will get jobs. Now,
you're right. This is the crux of it.
Yeah. Access to work are cutting back their money. Access to work is a government scheme that will help people who are disabled with things like keyboards, office equipment if they need it, a chair so that if they have spinal or SCI injuries, similar to myself, will help them in the workplace to settle in. That's been cut now. We don't have it. They're cutting money from access to work, and they're going to make people then go into work, and the figures are 100% or the figures that they're suggesting are 100%. And there is a disability employment gap. But I just heard you sigh, so carry on.
If I were to... what would I point at now if I wanted to argue that, because you clearly know a lot more about this than I do, if I wanted to argue that, no, we are going to help people, possibly people like you, Rob, into work, we're going to help you navigate a route that is not currently open to you, what would I point at then as proof of that, do you think?
At the moment, history. I've seen 2 disability work coaches. They asked me if I could write a CV. I answered yes. That was the end of it. I sat for an hour, then 2 hours talking about myself.
Sounds like my radio show.
yeah, it was. I was talking about myself and how I can't go back to being a mountain leader. Obviously, I'm in a wheelchair. So it was. Many people have got jobs despite the DWP.
Right.
And DWP and job centre staff, not DWP, job centre staff are not physicians. They're not medically equipped. They don't have the information on hand. And $1 billion putting into the DWP, I'm afraid it's not very much. It isn't a lot of money when you consider how big the department is. Now, without going into people like John Pring, who have written an amazing book called The Department, which notes the deaths over the years,
right,
and things like, and it's a harrowing book, there are failings. And when the Liz Kendall or Rachel Reeves says they will protect the most vulnerable, unfortunately for decades that hasn't happened. The concern the disabled community have is the 4-point rule. And for those who don't know about this, it's the 4 points is out of 8 or 10. And so to score 4, it's fairly high. And I know the example that has been given is of somebody who cannot wash below the waist and cannot cut their own food. They wouldn't score 4 points. Now, it was, as it stands, it's 12 points over the living, it's called the daily living component, because the mobility component is not being touched in this proposal. So the daily living component is how you live your life with your disability, and it is scored from 1 to 8 in most sections. And previously it was 12 points, you get the enhanced rate, under 12 is standard rate. Now they're saying you have to score over 12 and 4, which would mean that somebody would score higher than me overall in their, so they could score 18 points, but they will get the standard because they don't score 4 in one category, and 4 in most of them is kind of like a halfway point. If it's out of 8, 4 is average. It means that you have more trouble than an able-bodied person doing a task, but not as much trouble as, say, someone who is completely bedbound, for want of a better term. And that this information is going to, this 4 points is going to affect millions of people.
And this is the foundation stone of the concern that the Labour MPs have.
It is indeed.
That it is a blunt instrument that Keir Starmer that Liz Kendall is introducing.
Well, it seems to have come in on the back of the rise in mental health presentations, and not presentations, which can't, unfortunately, unlike some outlets, you can't just walk into your doctor and say, I'm feeling a bit blue, and they put you on PIP. But that's a universal credit element. PIP is not an out-of-work benefit, and it is not means tested. And, their former PMs have had PIP themselves. David Blunkett, an MP, has had PIP himself. Now, it is not means tested, and it is not work-related at all. And Liz Kendall made, in a speech she gave in the House of Parliament, she related it to work. I think it was 4 times in about 20 minutes. And so it's going down that line of trying to link PIP with unemployment. That's nothing to do with it. In fact, people use their PIP to get to work and do jobs. So if you take that away, unemployment with disabled people could actually go up.
Got it. Okay. I mean, you're obviously opposed to the bill, but you can conceive of a bill that you might support.
Yes, I can, and I think, and I agree with the MPs. We need to reform the current system. That reform needs to be done, but can
they fix this by Tuesday?
Oh goodness, no. No. I think that the information that the MPs want should be given to them, to the whole, all MPs, the information, but also the kind of, to just quickly, I don't enjoy people like Elizabeth Oakeshott calling me a parasite on Talk TV and saying that I languish. That's another word that's been used in the past.
This is my problem. I don't know who... is that her name? You mean Richard Tice's girlfriend?
Yes.
I think she's called Isabel, isn't she? Not Elizabeth.
Is it?
Anyway, who
Isabel,
cares?
Sorry, yes.
But that lazy right-wing rhetoric of languishing and scroungers and, immigration and all the rest of it, that's the thing that worries me, is that it could be. That's why I talked about footballification and the wisdom or otherwise of wondering how you'd respond to the same proposal if it was coming from those kind of people. But is this designed to appease people like that, in your view, in your personal view? I'm not going to lie to you, Rob. I haven't followed everything you've said because you're up to your eyes in it, obviously and necessarily, and it's incredible to hear the depth of your knowledge. But I haven't followed every single thing that you've said. So this is a question you may already have answered, in which case I apologise. But do you feel that they are trying to appease the worst of us with some of this, or not? Or do you think they've just got it a bit wrong?
A little of both.
Okay.
A little of both. I think that there are certain news outlets that have always had you get a free car. No, we don't. We actually pay for that out of the mobility component. That goes to Motability. Oh, well, you get this, you get that. I would give up everything I have, or very little financially, to be able to live my life like I used to. Every single
Of course you would. I know you would. Of course you would.
And the kind of the language, again, as you say, the footballification of it, I think it does appease a certain one. On my social media channels for disabled people, there is not one time that it hasn't been hijacked by immigration. Well, why are we we're spending all this money on immigration? And they're hijacking, posts. The two. I don't
understand. So if it wasn't for all the immigrants, then we could give more money to the disabled.
Exactly. And that's on every. So when Peter Stanovich puts a post up, and he was very good late into last night informing people of the numbers, on every single one, you will get 2 or 3 comments of people trying to hijack the OP, the original post.
They're tireless, aren't they? Absolutely tireless. Indefatigable, as George Galloway would say.
Yeah, and so there is footballification. There is this degree of people, I know someone down the road who's...
It's funny as well, isn't it? Because you know probably better than I do that if we banned immigration outright tomorrow, you'd be next.
Well, I said, yes, I did say to my partner when the former party were in, that I think that disabled people will be next. And they were introducing or proposing to introduce changes with a voucher scheme of PIP.
And to be fair, to speak to the other question about footballification, I think £15 billion was the number in place last time they were talking about the need to make cuts, and it wasn't predicated upon the idea. I mean, you could do it, couldn't you? As you say, not by Tuesday, but you could communicate to the public, to the disabled community and beyond, that there are lots of things we can do to get more of you into work, which is what almost all of you would like. And we will never, ever, ever turn away from the people who are never going to be able to because of their illness or their disability. It's possible, but it's not this.
For sure, and education is a huge part of it. You're 50% more likely to get a job as a disabled person if you have a degree. So going from I mean, most 67% of wheelchair users are not born disabled. It can happen to anybody. This is a safety net, and education is a huge part of it. You are much more likely to get a job. So going forward, as I would sort of say, I've sort of spoken to Ali Mirage about it, is education and support. They're two huge things disabled people want. And I think if this had been done differently, I think if Keir Starmer had listened in private, or the whips, I think Keir Starmer's got quite a lot on his plate. Sure. But I think if the whips had transmitted the feeling from the MPs in private, and he just said, do you know what, we might leave it till autumn when we're doing the autumn statement. And we'll have a proper look at this.
I mean, but part of the problem that I can talk about, because of what I do for a living and the things I understand, perhaps not quite as well as you understand this issue, is that education and training isn't going to get you any headlines. And even if it was there, even if it was in the package, even if it was in the proposals, there's, the Guardian might and the BBC might try to be even-handed about it, but everybody else is looking for headlines that talk about cuts to the perceived scroungers, and that's where the difference between intent and perception is so important. Rob, I'll just read you a quick message from Fabio. It's very brief. He just says, and this is for you, not for me. He says, God, you've got good callers. And he's right. Thank you. And I mean, let's hope that things are not as bad as you fear, but they're certainly not as good as Keir Starmer hopes. I think that's pretty clear. Thomas Watts has your headlines now.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:36 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It's Wednesday, which means PMQs will be with us at 12. Once again, a day of the deputies. Aggie Chambre will be joining me. Natasha, of course, is in The Hague with the Prime Minister, which means that Angela Rayner will be standing in for him at the dispatch box. I mentioned the sharpening of knives. I don't know. I have no real insights into this stuff. I never socialise with politicians. It always seems to me to be a very quick route to compromising your ability to give them a coating on the radio. But some people operate differently, of course. Angela Rayner, I have read, is being touted as potentially preparing herself for a tilt at the big job. It looks to me like gossip and tittle-tattle, but last week's performance at PMQs was cited by some commentators as proof of that particular theory. I don't know who's going to be the other one. Do we know? Alex Burghardt is the deputy leader of the Conservative Party. True or false? Alex Burghardt is the usual... Is he the deputy leader of the Conservative? Does she have a deputy? I don't even know. Who was it last week? It was Flip. Chris Flip last week. I could give Jenrick a go. That would be good for giggles, wouldn't it? Let Honest Bob have a crack. Anyway, I don't know who it's going to be, but I do care. Honest, 11:38 is the time. That'll be with us at 12. I want to talk to Noga Tarnopolsky a little later as well, after PMQs in Jerusalem, about what this latest round of events, whatever the truth may turn out to be, what has it done for Benjamin Netanyahu? Two questions I have. Noga is probably the best qualified person we know to answer. What is the domestic reception of the attacks upon Iran? Whether they were successful or not doesn't appear to matter. And secondly, what it's done for Netanyahu's political stroke legal position. because if, as I suspect, the strikes on Iran are very popular, it may have enhanced his electoral prospects. So the only reason he can't really call an election at the moment is, well, there's not one due, but why he wouldn't want one even if he had to, is because if he lost, he'd be in court by tea time. But if he was likely to win one, then I would suggest he might call one quicker than he needs to. So anyway, we'll talk to Noga about that before we start speculating unduly. And there's been a mayoral race in New York City. I wonder if you're aware of it, or possibly what the ramifications of the result may be. We'll have a look at that later as well. But first, Libby is in Peterborough. Libby, what would you like to say?
Hello. Thank you for taking my call. So, I've been on PIP for 6 years, and over the last 10 years, my health has declined with a fluctuating condition. Okay. So I've slowly cut down hours from 20 to 12, now at 9, working for the NHS.
Right.
I couldn't afford to live just on that, so I applied for the universal credit element.
Yes.
This has given me the highest rate. So I get an extra £416 a month, and then I'm allowed to earn a certain amount of money, and they top up the rest. If I lose my PIP, because I don't hit the 4 markers, I lose the whole lot. To universal credit, everything.
Why would you lose the universal credit if that's income related rather than condition related?
It's condition related, so it's called. You apply for UC50,
right,
which is the health element.
But there'd be
I think ESA.
I think the lad in Malvern addressed this, didn't he, and said that you'd then migrate to something else.
No, so ESA is migrating to UC50, the health element.
Oh, it's complicated. Forgive me for not being fully across all of this.
Yeah, so I'm one of the people that applied after ESA ended.
Right. So what would you be expected to live on in the event of losing what you've described? What would you be expected to live on?
I would still get mobility, so I'd get £100 a month on mobility, and then I'd get my earnings, which is around £450 a month, and then whatever, because I would then move on to, you need to find yourself a job. Well, I've got a job, so they'd give me a top-up rate, which they're saying is going to be up to £700, but they'd take off the money that I earn from that. So I'd essentially probably be on about £800-900 a month.
Okay, and what do you want at the moment?
At the moment, I get £1,400.
And the rationale for doing all of this doesn't seem to have taken people like you into account at all. You're capable of work, but not much. And if
I've had a disability DWP meeting
to
say, could we find you another job that you could do? Can you write a CV? Yes, just as Rob in the first call. Yes, I can write a CV. I'm articulate. I'm clever. I'm able to work from home for the NHS. I'm qualified. I used to work full time in a very active job.
So you could do more than 9 hours if some of that involved working from home.
Oh no, I already work only from home.
Right, sorry.
So I don't know how I would.
No, I mean, it is the detail. The devil, as ever, is in the detail, isn't it? So this is designed to, but by reducing your payments, it motivates you apparently, or encourages you, and they'll give you the help and the support that you need to get you into work. But you're already in work, and you can't do any more work, and they're going to take your money away anyway.
Yeah.
Well, that feels cruel.
The problem is, I fight for my job for the last 4 years. They've been so good in some ways, moving me to a department where I can work from home, reducing my hours. But still, because it's a fluctuating condition, I still have to call sick. So I'm on a trigger warning.
Yeah, of course you are, yes.
Because I can be fine to do the work one day for 3 hours, but not the next day, or not the day after. Or I could do it 4 days in a row. But you can't just say, hey, I'll work today when you don't need me.
None of us can. I mean, this is this is again the thing that's never going to make any headlines. Is the argument that workplaces need to change to accommodate the reality of situations like yours? But unless you can explain to me what those changes involve, then it's just meaningful rhetoric, isn't it? You're never going to be able to work on the days that you can't work, regardless of what help or support is put in place. And that bit of the jigsaw seems to be missing, as far as I can tell.
The biggest thing I've seen so far is one of the assessors asking me, how many usable hours a day do you have? And I said 4.
Yeah.
And she goes, right, that means you can work for 4 hours a day. And I went, no, that's usable hours. So that's eating, showering, getting dressed.
Yeah, I understand.
It includes all of that.
Have you been in touch with your MP at all, if you don't mind me asking?
I have. I haven't yet had a response.
Okay. Who is it? Let's give him a kick up the backside.
So it's Sam Carling. He's the young chap from Cambridge.
Right.
Cambridge West? No, Cambridge North.
Did you expect them? Well, and do we know whether he's on this list?
He's not. And the other MP for where I am work-based, he's not responded yet either, Andrew Pakes. But
so what we're looking at...
New, so I think they'll lose their roles if they don't go along.
Yeah, I see what you mean. They'll be tightening the thumb screws on MPs at the moment, but there's 122 of them in the Labour Party. A couple, of course, already suspended, but the overall total around about 130. And I think, like Rob before, you probably acknowledge that reform is necessary, but not the reform they've got planned. Fluctuation is missing from these calculations, I think. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, because some people would look at me going, you're on the highest rate of disability, yet you can do a lot of things, you just can't do them all the time. And that misses a whole range of things. Yeah, and that, I mean, to be crass about it, that just, for me, under my glorious rule, that just puts you in your own category of people for whom this bill is not designed to address, and therefore you'd have to have a separate set of circumstances for people who are like you, and touching a lot of nerves, Libby, Alice and others, in very, very similar situations. And I think that phrase there, that the fluctuation is absent from the calculation, is probably the one that is so far most upsetting, most offensive. It is offensive. If you are offended, it's because it's offensive, and you don't expect this sort of thing from a Labour government, even if it turns out to be born more of incompetence or a lack of listening than of actual cruelty or callousness. The results will be the same. Starmer saying that the current welfare system traps people on benefits. Well, Libby doesn't sound trapped, and yet she's going to be part of that £5 billion saving. So even if you like elements of this, you can't like that bit. And if you were her MP, I don't see how you could vote for it. Even if Keir Starmer is right, and I think he is. I think the current welfare system does trap people on benefits. It's not a trampoline into which people leap for fun. It's a safety net that catches them, but climbing back up to the tightrope of life could be made a heck of a lot easier. But Libby is not trapped on benefits. She's working essentially all the hours she can work, and she's going to lose a significant slice of her income. And that is cruel and wrong, and not something you expect from Labour. 11:46 is the time. Well, not something I expect from Labour. Maybe you do. I've got some great news coming up for fans of Mel Stride. If you could all form an orderly queue right now, okay? All fans of Mel Stride, move to the right of the room, please. Oh, come on. There must be one. Okay. Well, anyway, I've got some great news for Mel Stride's mum. Well, she may no longer be with us, of course, so I need to be careful. Who's going to celebrate Mrs. Stride? Mrs. Stride? Anyway, I've got great news for the Mel Stride fan club after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
So 12 is the time. There's a journalist, I should do it more, the journalists I admire, but there aren't as many of them as you might hope. But one of them, most definitely, is Chaminda Giannetti, and they have done some work for The Big Issue, just published today, showing that the government's planned disability benefit cuts could affect the majority of current working age claimants with, and a list of conditions here, ischemic, I've probably pronounced that wrongly, heart disease, inflammatory arthritis, that's going to be fluctuating, isn't it, hip and knee disorders, and Crohn's disease, according to official figures revealed to Big Issue. You're also seeing benefit payments at risk for working age claimants with sickle cell anemia or HIV/AIDS, 40% of those with amputations or liver failure, and between 40 and 50% of those with tuberculosis or post-traumatic stress disorder. They also suggest that the plans could substantively reduce the number of claimants with multiple sclerosis and certain types of cancer, including breast, bowel and cervical. It's not a forecast of how many existing claimants will in practice lose their benefits, because it could turn out to be lower. It's just the proportion of claims put at risk by them because of that personal independence payment, the daily living award criteria. That's the slashing of eligibility, if you like. So the problem with this now is it's a political nightmare for Keir Starmer. It's much more of a nightmare. It's an existential nightmare for my callers, directly affected. But if Labour squeak over the line, and the numbers suggest that they'll need, well, they will. If there's 130 MPs planning to vote against, then on the current majority, they will lose. But the Tories might be minded to support it, which could be a political nightmare for Keir Starmer. We'll have to wait and see. But if the detail that journalists like Chaminda and callers like Robin Morvan are aware of and successfully explaining to bears of very little brain like me, if those details kick in subsequent to an actual victory for the Labour government, then they've got a whole heap of new problems. They've got the plight, the suffering, and possibly even the deaths of people on their hands. Let's go to devisers. Martha is there. Martha, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Thank you for taking my call. First-time caller, very anxious person and extremely nervous.
Well, listen to me for a moment. Take your time, okay? And do not worry. You're among friends.
Thank you. I'm shaking. I rang in because of the appalling rhetoric that's coming out of the Labour Party. To give you an idea of my circumstances, I have multiple severe anxiety disorders. I have post-traumatic stress disorder, agoraphobia with panic, and howling obsessive-compulsive disorder. Okay. It's all I can do, just to get from one end of the day to the other. I have terrible concentration problems. I can't work. I haven't been able to work for, 15 years now. So I was very grateful to qualify for PIP. In 2014, I was on ESA before that. I've just recently been migrated onto universal credit, so I have a front seat on the reality of what's going on. Clearly. And the what's coming out of politicians, what's not being challenged. Your previous callers have stolen some of my thunder, so I apologise if I repeat them.
Don't you worry, I do it all the time.
It's this idea that you can just rock up and choose to be on ESA or choose to be on PIP is just so far from the reality. Trying to apply for it is probably the most terrifying thing I've ever been through, and I've been through some. The other thing is, what's never mentioned is the amount of evidence that you have to submit to be considered for a claim. And take, for example, going through the universal credit migration, they have had information from me that goes back, 15 years. And it's like, oh, no, you have to prove it all again. You are put through so many hoops. It's not just, oh, I fancy being on those benefits. And, that it's being repeated so often by politicians. I'm just so disgusted with Labour.
I understand why. I haven't heard Labour politicians buying in completely to the sort of Daily Telegraph, Daily Mail narrative of scrounging and swinging the lead, but
they are.
Well, they certainly seem to be dancing to that tune, don't they?
Listening to them, they're actually worse than Osborne. He would not have done, and I think he's even said it publicly, that he would not have made the changes that Starmer is proposing for PIP. I qualify for the enhanced daily living component as well as the enhanced mobility component. But as I said, it's spread across all manner of categories. This 4-point thing, there's two things about that. Number one, you don't often get awarded the points that you should when you go through the PIP process. They undermark you, if you like. I was undermarked on a couple of points in my last assessment. But the thing is, I don't want to challenge it because it wouldn't make any difference. But I am dreading my next PIP review, because if I lose it, I will lose my home. I will end up destitute.
Why do you fear, and I don't want to sound unhelpful, but we need to be a little bit brief, because the PMQs is a tight schedule. It's not a junction I can treat with the casualness that I treat most junctions. But why do you fear you might lose it?
Because if it is so hard to score 4 points in a particular category, even when your condition merits it. And
we think they're going to make it harder. We think they're going to make it harder.
Oh, they are with this 4-point rule. There will be so many people. The other thing I wanted to say, to squeeze in before you go, is about mental health and the way it's dismissed. It is equally as devastating if you have a severe mental health problem. It is equally as devastating as a physical disability. I mean, I cannot hold a conversation with someone and make a cup of tea at the same time. My ability to concentrate is so badly impaired. I spend all of my days counting incessantly, and everything I do is ritualised.
Weapons grade OCD, isn't it?
It really is.
So I mean, anyone listening to this thinking, well, you could do this or you could do that, or you're sounding pretty good on the phone to James.
I had a good education. Sure. I'm articulate, but I'm also a waste of space.
No, you're not. You're never that. But that's how they've made you feel today.
And the one last thing is this comment about everything for working people and the benefit system helps nobody. That is the most flagrant lie on the part of Prime Minister Starmer.
Because they're but for the grace of God.
Of course it helps people. Yeah. If it wasn't for it, and I'm so grateful. And as the other thing is, people say, "Oh, it's all taxpayers. You're just scrounging." I used to be a taxpayer before I had a life-changing accident. But I'm sorry for losing it.
That's okay. You warned us that you might, and you've got your case across. I don't want you to use that phrase "waste of space," but I can't stop you. I don't know what I can say to persuade you that you shouldn't. I'm just so sorry that you've ended up in that frame of mind, Martha. And I hope your fears are unfounded. But I do think that the rarity. I don't like having politicians on the programme because I prefer you. I'd always rather talk to callers. But we might need to make an exception on this. Aggie Chambre is here. What is... Good grief, my throat's completely gone. Excuse me, why don't you just talk for a while about PMQs?
Okay, I'd be delighted to, James. I think you right there have encapsulated why dozens of Labour MPs, over 100 Labour MPs, are so concerned about these welfare reforms, because they are having conversations with people like Martha. I think it is highly likely that is what is about to come up at PMQs. Apart from anything else, the Conservatives are making it a little bit easier for us when we are trying to guess by showing who the Shadow Cabinet Minister is, who is associated with that. So today it's going to be Mel Stride, the Shadow Chancellor, and he, of course, has talked a lot about welfare. He will be across from Angela Rayner, so I think that is what is most likely to come up. The Conservatives...
What angle will they take? Because this is about a third of what the Tories were planning to cut from the welfare spend. So will they be saying you haven't gone far enough, or will they be trying to make political hay with the rebellion by pretending that they believe it's gone too far?
They're in this slightly weird position. So everyone was trying to work out what the Conservatives were going to do or say. And then last night, Kemi Badenoch put out a post on social media saying, for us to support the government's welfare bill, we need Starmer to make 3 commitments. Number 1, commit to properly reducing welfare spending. Well, they can probably do that. Number 2, commit to getting people off benefits and into work. Okay, they can probably do that. Number 3, commit to not putting up taxes in the budget. They cannot do that. So... effectively, Kemi Badenoch is not going to vote with the government, which...
So she's trying to ignore the reality of their own position while adding to a rebellion that... I mean, it's a bit disingenuous, isn't it? The idea that listen, I'll support you if you give me a unicorn, she's saying.
Yes, and as I was
because obviously we're in favour of cuts to disability and sickness benefits. It's kind of all we stand for these days, apart from something, small boat something. But we can't vote for cuts to these disability and sickness benefits because that would get you out of a political hole, a potentially huge political hole. Therefore, my public position, Kemi Badenoch says, is that we will support these cuts to disability and sickness benefits, brackets which we love, close brackets, but only if you give us a unicorn, brackets, ha ha ha, close brackets.
That pretty much sums it up.
Yeah, okay, I get it now.
But I mean, on the face of it, it looks like political manoeuvring, right? It looks sort of clever-ish. The government will likely lose this vote if the Conservatives vote with the rebels. But if you look at it another way, it's not necessarily as clever as it seems, because if Kemi Badenoch had come out last night and said, we will support the government, I think it would have made it much more difficult for Labour rebels, because they would have said... And people who are on the fence as well, and there are a lot of people on the fence about what to do on Tuesday, they would have said, it's going to be so difficult for us. We are effectively voting with the Conservatives. Look, this is a Conservative welfare cut.
If she came out and said, we love it.
Yeah.
Then, okay, well, let's find out what happens. We're going live.
Not least that we both viscerally disagree with the Chancellor's tax policies. And it is great to see the Right Honourable Lady standing in temporarily for the Prime Minister for the second week running. Although I know there are many sitting behind her who wish this was a permanent arrangement. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, you will find many of their names amongst the 122 who've signed up to oppose the government's welfare bill. They say that the bill is dangerously rushed and ill thought through. So can the Right Honourable Lady explain why she thinks that she is right and 122 of her own colleagues are wrong?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, first of all, Mr. Speaker, it's nice to face the latest wannabe. I'll tell the Right Honourable member why we're pressing ahead with our reforms, and that is because we're investing £1 billion into tailored employment support, a right to try to help more people back into work, and ending reassessments for the most severely disabled who will never be able to work. Mr. Speaker, we won't walk away and stand by and abandon millions of people trapped in the failing system, left behind by him and his colleagues.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Right Honourable Lady completely sidestepped my question. She can't even defend her own government's policy. Can she at least assure the House that the vote on Tuesday will actually go ahead?
On Tuesday. Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know if he sort of listened to what I said because I was reading off the script, but what I can tell him, and I don't need the script, we will go ahead on Tuesday.
Well, there you have it, Mr. Speaker. There will be a vote in this House on Tuesday on the welfare bill, although many on the back benches could be forgiven for thinking they've heard this before with the winter fuel payment, where they were marched up the hill, and we all know where that story ended. But, Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we are absolutely clear. We will help her to get their bill through if they can commit to actually reducing the welfare bill and getting people off benefits and into work. Can the Right Honourable Lady make that commitment right now? Yes or no?
Well, if ever we needed a reminder of the party opposite having no shames, it's their demands for this bill, Mr. Speaker. He demands a programme to help people into work, exactly what this bill does. After he left 1 in 8 young people out of the economy, he demands no new taxes from the party that raised taxes to record levels, and he demands further welfare savings, Mr. Speaker, from the man who was in charge as the welfare bill absolutely belittled. They say cut welfare bill, they failed. They say cut people in work, they failed. They say no tax increases, they failed.
Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid the Right Honourable Lady has clearly not read her own legislation. The bill will see the number of people on welfare rising for every single year going forward. There is no commitment from the Right Honourable Lady to cut the number of people on welfare. And even if they manage to deliver these reforms, almost every respected economist now says Tax rises are all but inevitable in the autumn. But after the budget, Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor said, and I quote, "I'm not coming back for more taxes." Mr. Speaker, British businesses have been hit again and again by Labour's economic mismanagement. They are desperate for certainty. So can the Right Honourable Lady give them that certainty now and repeat to the House the Chancellor's promise not to raise taxes at the budget?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this is a bit rich. Unbelievable. Inflation above 11%. The biggest tax rises by their party. I take no lectures. And on this issue in particular, Mr. Speaker, they can't make their minds up. First they said our reforms were taking too long. Then they say they were rushed. Then their front bench said our measures were too tough. And now they say they need to be tougher. No plan, no idea. I wonder why their party was left in such a mess.
Mr. Speaker, the whole House will have heard that the Right Honourable Lady did not repeat the Chancellor's promise not to raise taxes. And Britain's businesses have today been put on notice. Tax rises are coming. Specifically, in her own area, despite Labour's promises to freeze council tax, the IFS says that the spending review will mean the biggest council tax increases in a generation, a £7 billion tax rise. And yet the Chancellor and the Prime Minister have repeatedly claimed that the government will not raise taxes on working people. So can I ask the Right Honourable Lady, why doesn't she think that council tax is paid by working people?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Again, Mr. Speaker, I think they've got an absolute nerve when council tax rose every single year under their government. In fact, Mr. Speaker, I had to turn down the Tories on the LJ who wanted me to take away the precept to make sure that they could raise taxes above the 5%. We've kept it there, Mr. Speaker, while delivering money for local government where they had austerity, put taxes up and ruined the British economy.
Well, Mr. Speaker, when you cut out the blather, isn't the reality that this Labour government has condemned us to higher taxes, more debt, fewer jobs, more pain for businesses right up and down our country? Borrowing up, unemployment's up, inflation up. Yet the Right Honourable Lady tells us the government's plan is working. It's not just me who isn't convinced, Mr. Speaker. The people behind her are not convinced either. And neither are the public. In fact, Mr. Speaker, I'm not even sure if the Right Honourable Lady herself is convinced. So can I ask her, isn't she just a little embarrassed to be defending policies she doesn't even agree with herself?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm embarrassed every week that somebody comes here from their opposition who doesn't apologise for the mess they left this country in. There was one party that crashed the economy and left families paying the price. We're putting working people first, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud. We've got a huge boost to the minimum wage, the biggest uplift to affordable housing in a generation, and expanding free school meals to 500,000 children. The Tories' choice, billions of pounds in unfunded tax cuts for the very wealthiest. We know where that gets us. It's their same old Tory failed approach. They haven't listened and they haven't learned a thing.
John Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Frodder Community High School in my constituency was forced to relocate to Washington after their just over 8-year-old building, built under the previous government, was found to have cracks in the infrastructure. This incredibly distressing news has required huge resilience and strength from the local community. So will my right honourable friend join me in paying tribute to the staff, to the parents, and most importantly to the students at Frodder Community High School, and join me in commending them for their hard work and dedication during this incredibly destabilising time?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, I will do, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for bringing this important issue to my attention. I can only imagine the disruption and challenges facing the school community. One of the shameful legacies of the party opposite was to leave schools across our country literally crumbling. We're fixing that with £20 billion of investment in school rebuildings programme over the next decade to rebuild over 750 schools, Mr. Speaker. And I know the Minister for Early Education will be happy to meet with him to discuss.
Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Stacey Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I start by associating myself and my party with the remarks of the Deputy Prime Minister in calling for de-escalation in the Middle East, for the release of hostages and for the urgent aid to get into Gaza. We Liberal Democrats are opposed to the government's cuts to personal independence payments and carers allowance. And with a growing rebellion on the government's own benches, it seems as though the government may be forced to push these cuts through with the support of the official opposition. The Deputy Prime Minister knows that some of those affected are still waiting for justice after the carers allowance scandal saw thousands of innocent carers hounded for repayments. So can the Deputy Prime Minister give a cast-iron guarantee that if these cuts are pursued, that at the very least, not a single person will lose a penny until the carers allowance scandal review has been completed and the recommendations implemented?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, thank you for opening comments, Mr. Speaker, and she knows that we've already been taking steps and those steps will continue on the carers allowance. The welfare system, as she knows as well, is failing people. Labour are the party of work, but we're also the party of fairness. That's why our bill will deliver the largest permanent real terms increase to basic out-of-work support since the 1980s, invest in tailored employment support so that people can try work safely, Mr. Speaker, and to ensure that those that can never work are properly supported.
Stacey Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's disappointing that the Deputy Prime Minister couldn't give that cast-iron guarantee, but if the government does pursue this bill next week, then we will pursue this matter on behalf of carers. Mr. Speaker, given the reports that the government is giving a green light to President Trump's demands for a state visit to be brought forward to September, does the Deputy Prime Minister agree that the UK should urgently convene talks with the White House in advance of that state visit in order to leverage that state visit to secure US guarantees for Ukraine, including the use of frozen Russian assets, and to secure a joint UK-US message to Putin that together our two countries will not let Putin win his illegal war?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, I say, Mr. Speaker, the UK government is always in discussions, negotiations and talks with our US counterparts. We're really pleased that the US President is coming for a second state visit, and we will continue to welcome in that vein and we'll continue to have those discussions.
Debbie Abraham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Oldham, there are 727 families currently living in temporary accommodation. 8,000.
And 14 minutes after 12 is the time. Bringing it in almost bang on time, which is not something that happens on this programme very often, so we should probably make the most of it when it is gifted to us by Angela Rayner and Mel Stride. We'll pick over the bones of what you just heard after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 17 minutes after 12 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Erica suggests that Daisy Cooper won that, although I felt Mel Stride conducted himself quite well.
I agree with that, actually. I thought he did well. I thought Angela Rayner and Mel Stride felt like they were communicating with each other and kind of answering each other's questions, which does sound like the bare minimum, but inexplicably it's not in Prime Minister's questions. And I think he actually successfully got two good news lines out of her. One of them saying the vote will go ahead on Tuesday, and that's actually a line that our political editor, Natasha Clark, had already got this morning. Well, quite. Where is she? Second week in a row. But she asked Sir Keir Starmer about that from NATO, and he said it is going to go ahead on Tuesday. But since then, just in those few hours, there was speculation. I spoke to one senior Labour MP who said they thought the government might pull the full bill.
Because they're going to lose, as things stand.
They are going to lose.
Yeah.
I mean, without concessions or a delay, they are going to lose, or unless the Conservatives change their mind, which, listening to that, doesn't sound like they're going to. And actually, I think we should talk briefly about Rachel Reeves's face, the Chancellor, just sitting next to Angela Rayner looking so strained. And I don't think we should be kind of under any kind of misinformation that this is going potentially the biggest crisis the Labour government has had in a year that has been pretty uneasy. They are going to lose this vote unless something changes, and it is going to be really, really problematic. And it's not the usual suspects on that list of 123 MPs. It is lots of people from
chairs, which, I mean, these are people who've been handed plum positions because of their perceived competence and, to a lesser extent, loyalty.
And at this stage, the government is throwing everything they can at this. I'm told that at Cabinet yesterday, every Cabinet Minister was essentially given a list of rebels to phone to try and get them to change their mind. And since that point and today, that number has gone up. Yeah. So these rebels were having conversations with people like Ed Miliband, Wes Streeting, and at the end of it, they said, well, I'm still going to vote against, even when they're essentially being told to listen very, very carefully because it's a confidence vote. Now, Sir Keir Starmer said yesterday it's not a confidence vote, but people were being told that. So, you know, that's why it's worth mentioning just Rachel Reeves' sort of strained expression. And the other...
I mean, she always looks like that, doesn't she? She's quite a severe looking...
She is. I do think
Liz Kendall's baby, this, isn't it? And
I think it's the two of them. I think it will land on...
Where does this line come from that there'll be no tax rises? Is it because she's being held hostage to it? And yet most people... It's a weird place, this country, at the moment. Everyone's walking around pointing out how awful everything is. Potholes are a very popular indicator of a sort of systemic failure, aren't they? And yet, as far as I can tell, everybody's also insisting that we don't need to raise any more money to fix things. Unless you're an immigration obsessive and you think that somehow by abolishing immigration you'll create magic sums of money to spend on all of the things that you dream about spending money on. Where does this hostage-taking position on tax come from for Rachel Reeves?
Well, so after her first budget, she went to a CBI conference, Confederation of British Industry conference, and there she said, I'm not coming back for no more tax rises. And she has not, as far as I can tell, repeated that. And I think it was either basically a mistake or she said it, thought it, and then afterwards was sort of told by Number 10 or whoever.
She meant business taxes rather than income tax or something like that, maybe.
Potentially, but she so separately to that, she has said she will not repeat tax rises on the scale that they did in the last budget. And I actually asked her about that, I think about 3 weeks ago now. She was at a speech and I said, can you repeat that? And she said, yeah, we won't do the scale that we did, the £40 billion worth of tax rises again. But you know, you heard Angela Rayner there. They obviously cannot commit to not raising taxes in the next budget because, you know, they are in a really difficult position economically. I know they say that the tide is shifting, but look at what they're having to do on defence, and you know they are pouring money into the NHS, and we don't know yet, but they might be £5 billion short pretty soon if they do have to offer concessions or indeed U-turn on this bill. Of course, Angela Rayner just saying we will go ahead on Tuesday and that Labour wouldn't walk away from millions trapped in the failing system, talking about welfare.
Yeah, I mean, my callers are usually reliable, but I don't think anyone will mind me saying that you can never get 100% coverage of all the angles. I'm not. Where do you go for a really compelling account of why people should support this bill? This is the thing that occurs to me when you describe the ring around, in that they're clearly not making a compelling enough case for their own MPs. So goodness only knows how they're supposed to persuade callers like Martha and Rob, who we've had on today, that they have nothing to fear. They clearly do.
I think that is exactly the problem. They have not successfully made this argument, and they've also sort of wavered on what the argument exactly is. Sometimes it's financial, and there is a financial case from their point of view. You know, they are talking about saving £5 billion, but if they don't do anything on the welfare bill, it is projected to be £100 billion by the end of the decade. So they are seriously worried about the economics of it, but also then they are trying to make the moral case, which is what you heard Angela Rayner trying to do there, saying Labour wouldn't walk away from millions trapped in the failing system. And then I don't think they've successfully done both at the same time. And also there is the point about winter fuel as well, which is lots of Labour MPs, including those who are new, felt like they were walked up a hill and they had to make that case on the doorstep. And then a year later, they had to say, oh, hang on, no, sorry, we're not doing that anymore.
So and they
are terrified of having to vote on Tuesday for this with the government, have to make the case for it to their constituents, and then in a few months' time or even a few weeks' time it to be changed and them to be the person who's sort of feeling pretty exposed.
Yeah, and that's the sort of problem with the U-turn. We had fascinating phone-ins about the psychological message that it delivers, the wisdom of saying I will never ever make any U-turn whatsoever, versus the honesty and the emotional intelligence of saying I've made a mistake and therefore I am changing my path. Both things can be true at the same time, but one thing it definitely does is add to the notion that enough pressure will result in a buckling, and that's why the pressure is growing rather than shrinking. James is convinced we're both wrong. In fact, he writes, you're both wrong. The bill will go through on Tuesday and Labour will win. There will be Tory rebels too. Is that a calculation that we've overlooked?
Not on the current numbers, even if there are Conservative rebels.
But why would a Tory rebel on this?
Well, if Conservatives heard their government making the case in the last few years for why welfare cuts and welfare reform is so important, they maybe would be taken with that.
They'll be whipped, will they?
They'll be whipped. They'll be heavily whipped.
Rebellion.
It would be a rebellion
against their own party.
Yes,
based upon a desire to see Labour get out of a very potentially deep hole. I'll tell you what, James, I'll eat my hat if there is a notable Tory rebellion on this.
I would be surprised. The one thing that somebody said to me yesterday...
I didn't just call you James, I was speaking to the texter. I haven't
you can call me James.
Even I haven't started having conversations with myself by name live on the radio yet, but give me time.
Somebody said to me yesterday they thought that there was a chance that some of the rebels might vote for it at second reading, which is next Tuesday. Because at second reading you can't make the argument that you've done literally everything you can, that it's still possible to change it after second reading. But then between second reading and third reading, there'll be a week between those 2 days. They thought there would be resignations from government, and they thought that they would definitely lose it at third reading. But things are moving quickly and people are not changing their minds necessarily to back the government. People are changing their minds the other way, and it is possible that it could change, and we all do have kind of a watching out for potential more resignations in the coming days. I've spoken to a PPS yesterday and said, what are you going to do? Because they'd said they thought they were going to have to vote against the government, and they said, I'm weighing up. It's a really difficult decision, but they would have to resign, and they are not the only person considering that. I've heard people talk about a dozen potential resignations, but again, whether those come before the second reading or the third reading, or indeed at all, whether or not the government's able to convince them not to resign, we will have to see.
James, I'm interested in his certainty here. He says he will eat his hat if the bill fails. What does he know that we don't know? Or what does he understand that we don't understand? We shall have to wait and find out. And so to Daisy Cooper. So they're sort of interesting on the welfare cuts because they are against them, as you heard her talking about there, but they don't want to put their name on the reasoned amendments because Labour whips would then say to rebels, well, look, you're helping out the opposition. So it's sort of a similar calculation that I was explaining that the Conservatives are trying to make as well. What she said was quite interesting because she had to be quite careful on her line because of that calculation. But she said, are you going to confirm that if these cuts go ahead, not a single person will lose a penny until the carers allowance comes in, which Angela Rayner did not say yes to. And then asked about Donald Trump, which is, they're pretty consistent, aren't they, the Lib Dems, asking about Donald Trump. Punching a bruise,
especially because they feel the Labour government aren't able to do it, which they are either unable or unwilling.
Yes.
And so her second question was saying that the government has reportedly agreed Trump's state visit will take place in September now, just in a few months, and asked whether the government will leverage that visit to get assurances for Ukraine. Angela Rayner replied, the government is really pleased Trump is coming for a second state visit.
A few people are suggesting that Angela Rayner was both defending things she doesn't actually want to defend and compromising her own credibility as the senior member of the government closest to reality, as it were. I mean, Starmer didn't grow up in privileged circumstances, but he speaks as if he did. It's a weird one. Starmer very much, Rayner very much wears her background on her sleeve, and it makes many people think, for good or for ill, that she truly understands the working class experience or the experience of vulnerability or the necessity and importance of welfare, which she does from her backstory. And I just don't believe she was speaking from the heart today.
I think that is the thoughts of lots of people in Westminster.
That's why I mentioned it.
Yeah, I mean, she was specifically asked about that, wasn't she? Whether she was embarrassed to be supporting this or saying that she was supporting this, to which she responded, it's embarrassing what the Conservatives did when they were in government, embarrassing seeing you come up every week and defend it. But I mean, people close to her say she backs it. She's got to say that, right? But she is seen to be somebody who is more on the left of the party, more popular with the members, of which this policy is unpopular. So she's got to tread this difficult line. But as I say, people close to her do defend it. Just on the Sir Keir Starmer point, I do think it's interesting that when I was in my old job, did a profile on him, and one of the things that people said about him was that he regretted getting knighted because the Conservatives made such a big thing of him being Sir Keir Starmer, and it made him seem so much like part of the establishment, when actually his background, as you say, he didn't grow up in kind of extremely privileged situation by any means, but because of that Sir Keir Starmer and because of being Director of Public Prosecutions, they were able to make that argument pretty successfully.
That's really interesting. I haven't heard that before. It makes some sense as well, although I know when I interviewed him on stage a few years ago, the investiture, I think, was a moment in his life that his parents shared in, and it clearly meant an awful lot to him that they got to witness that, and yet it has become something of an albatross around his neck in the context of parliamentary politics. Aggie, Chambre, many thanks indeed. The time now is 12:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We're going to cross to Jerusalem and New York before the end of the programme, and if you want to find out why, you better stay listening. But first, Elizabeth Secker has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
33 minutes after 12 is the time. I've got about a dozen messages accusing me of having forgotten to deliver the payoff on the Mel Stride hook and tease. I told you about 5 to 12 that I had some very good news for the Mel Stride fan club in the unlikely event of such a caucus existing. I mean, I don't want to be rude. I don't want to start alienating my beloved audience, but honestly, he was doing PMQs, you dopes. That was the delivery. That was the hook and tease. I've got some good news for Mel, and then I don't know why I bother sometimes. Anyway, that was it. So sorry. There is no big reveal. Time now to cross to Jerusalem, where the freelance reporter Noga Tarnopolsky awaits. Noga helps us enormously with matters Israeli and of course matters Middle Eastern, but rarely have we had a week as eventful as the last one. Let me begin, Noga, with the obvious question of how well received the attack or the attacks upon Iran have been or not been at home.
Hi, James. Look, it's a tricky question, to be honest, because the notion of attacking Iran, and in particular attacking its nuclear facilities, of removing from Israelis this threat that has hovered over them for so many years, I think there's close to a universal consensus about that. A bit less among Arab Israelis than Jewish Israelis, but nonetheless pretty much across the board. However, even during these 12 days of war, there was quite a bit of, I would say, war objectives slippage, and that wasn't very well received. There were all of these Netanyahu ministers who started talking about assassinating the leader of Iran or regime change, flirting with the notion. That already brought up questions. Nonetheless, the operation kind of restored Israelis' pride in their pilots, in the Mossad. However, the landing after the end of this operation has been really rough for Netanyahu. So he was humiliated by Trump yesterday, as I'm sure you saw.
Yes.
I mean, utterly. He was forced to turn back, fighter jets in the air like the head of some vassal country. He then was forced to confront this American intelligence report that leaves many doubts about whether the initial aims, right?
Doesn't it just? Yes.
And then Israelis woke up to a tragedy, which is 7 soldiers killed in one incident in Gaza. So the let's say his come down from his euphoria during the week and a half of the Iran operation has been really rough.
How much does it matter that the success or otherwise of the attack? I mean, the available intelligence would suggest that Israel didn't inflict much damage at all upon the nuclear facilities, and that the USA has set back the program by mere months. So it was essentially a failure. But there's a big difference between operational reality and public relations. Does it matter? I mean, will it filter through to the Israeli public that possibly they haven't removed the threat, if there is a threat at all?
Well, I mean, there is a threat, and if only because the Iranian leadership has threatened Israelis with annihilation for years and years. And
Benjamin Netanyahu has been claiming since 1992 that they're mere moments away from creating a nuclear missile. But if the mission has failed, will that affect the popularity of the exercise?
Gravely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Hugely. And it's not just the nuclear question. It's also the matter of the ballistic missiles, which have, destroyed the ability to live a normal life in Israel. And they remain a permanent threat if they still exist. Israelis are very much aware. What I want to say about Netanyahu is absolutely you're right. He is the boy who cries wolf. That said, it doesn't mean a threat doesn't exist.
Exactly that. And the wolf turned up, of course. That's the bit of the story that many people who use the figure of speech often overlook. And in terms of his political survival, I mean, we've talked a few times about how something that looks increasingly like perpetual war is the best guarantee he has of staying out of court and possibly even staying out of jail. Does this improve his electoral chances? I mean, is he likely to go?
Well, it hasn't. I can share with you, rallied behind the flag, around the flag in the sense of supporting the operation, but it hasn't brought them back to him, at least for now.
So, I mean, the scary question then becomes what else he could... What does he have left? In terms
Not much.
No.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay. What does he have left in terms of keeping the sort of fires burning? He's not going to be pulling out of Gaza anytime soon, but you've mentioned that 7 soldiers have been lost there. I think more than 40 Palestinians were killed on their way to receive aid at distribution sites in Gaza. He can't really go into Iran without I don't know if you can permanently alienate Donald Trump because he's so fickle, but he would certainly invite an awful lot of abuse from Donald Trump if he were to go into Iran again. What options are open to him?
I think he's more or less out of cards, which is one of the reasons you hear some talk in Israel of the possibility of snap elections. I personally don't buy it, but there are rumors in that direction. Of course, he can keep the war in Gaza going for quite a bit longer, but it's so unpopular in Israel. And with Donald Trump fed up with him, it is going to be harder and harder. It's also already been almost a 21-month war. I mean...
We've spoken many times about, isn't it? We've spoken, or a million Liz Trusses. We've spoken often about the perilousness of his position, and yet he always seems to emerge on the other side. Where would you put this in the annals of his moments of jeopardy? One of the greatest, or just sort of mid-table?
No, very much mid-table. I don't think he's in parliamentary danger, at least not for now, not that I see. The only way to topple him for now is a vote in the parliament, in the Knesset, and he survived such a vote, barely, but he did survive it just 2 days before the Iran operation. I don't see the opposition bringing that up again. I don't see the prospect of a general strike or anything dramatic in that sense.
And just remind me when the next general election has to be called by. What's the sort of...
By law,
yes,
it has to be by October of 2026.
So, I mean, the calculation he'll be making is whether or not the sugar rush of support for the attacks upon Iran might make a difference, a significant enough difference to make the window, the short-term window ahead, his best chance of securing another win.
When you ask me what cards he has left, I think... they're more domestic cards. I think he could try to keep the emergency regulations in place long enough to say that the election has to be postponed, for example.
Oh, gosh. Okay. Noga, thank you. I suppose I should ask whether or not you think this ceasefire is going to hold, because I don't know who else to ask, really. Donald Trump doesn't seem to know what day it is, but do you think from the Israeli point of view the ceasefire will stay in place?
I don't think Israel at this point, having been slapped around by Donald Trump, would dare to initiate anything that breaks the ceasefire. I'll put it that way.
It's so interesting to hear your perspective, because I mean, over here, thank you, Noga Tarnopolsky, reporting live, as you could tell, from Jerusalem. That hasn't been a big part of the conversation here. Isn't it interesting, the difference that perspective makes? The fact that the slapping around, as she described it, of Netanyahu, I mean, the report was that Trump was on the phone to him, telling him to turn his aeroplanes around, and he turned around most but not all of them. There was a sort of face-saving exception to it. And of course that's going to be the big story domestically, but it's barely touched the sides of the coverage in the UK. And the US would probably fall somewhere between the two positions, but there it is. The ceasefire, if it stays in place, will involve an enormous amount of resentment and reluctance on the part of Benjamin Netanyahu. But there it is. That's the other question, isn't it? The idea of whether or not there's going to be some sort of I don't know, a potential electoral benefit. I didn't know that there were rumours in Jerusalem that this was a possibility of a snap election, when I suggested to you earlier that this could provide a big enough little boost to make him think this will be my best chance of getting an election. I don't know what you'd put your money on, whether or not you're going to wait until the last possible moment, whether or not he's going to go early because he's enjoying some support or widespread support for this particular policy, or whether or not Noga's prediction or possible projection of emergency powers, meaning you don't have to have an election, which of course Donald Trump objected to when Volodymyr Zelensky was doing it on the grounds of actually being at war, but which Winston Churchill benefited from in this country in the 1940s. It is coming up to 1:45. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Staying with foreign politics after this. I kind of need to after PMQs. It acts as a sort of mouthwash almost, a political mouthwash. So we'll have a little gargle about the New York mayoral election after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
47. Can I make a little confession to you? You may have noticed I've got a bit of a tickly throat today, so my concentration levels are probably only at 99.9% of the 100% that I normally dedicate to this programme. I thought Angela Rayner called Mel Stride a wallaby. I thought it was a joke I didn't understand. She's another wallaby. Of course, she said wannabe. Anyway, she returned to the question of this rotating roster of stand-ins at PMQs in what I thought was quite a winning fashion.
It's been quite the carousel, and the leader of the opposition said she was going to get better week on week. She already has in the last 2 weeks by not
so that's more like it, a little bit of push and shove. Now, there's been quite a significant election in New York, and to tell us A, what the election involves, and B, why the significance, I'm joined by Sarah Baxter, who's a director of the Marie Colvin Center in the city and also a columnist for the I newspaper. Have we had a big upset, Sarah?
We certainly have, James. New York is reeling from the news that somebody that nobody had ever heard of a few weeks ago, called Zohran Mamdani, is now the official Democratic candidate running for mayor in New York. And he's from the progressive left. He was born in Uganda, brought up in South Africa, Muslim parentage, has said things like globalize the intifada. And wow. New Yorkers are waking up this morning to think that he has a very realistic shot of winning the city.
Do we know how this has happened? Has it been an extraordinary successful ground game? Has he been knocking on loads of doors? Did he raise a ton of money? Or has he just sort of benefited from a political malaise or lethargy?
Well, a political malaise among the Democratic establishment. Political excitement and desire for change among young people in the city. Now, he's very young himself. He's 33.
Oh, Lord.
He's very radical. I think the big question, he's rather handsome. I think the big question is he going to be a new Obama who inspired youth but actually ended up not being quite as radical as everybody thought? Or is he going to try and do what he said, which is free buses, rent controls, government-run or New York City-run grocery stores, lots of affordable housing and so on. And of course, he says he's representing all those New Yorkers who don't have an opportunity to thrive in the city, which is hugely expensive, as I'm sure everybody knows, like London. And, of course, the billionaire class did go with Andrew Cuomo, former mayor of New York, but discredited over Me Too scandals.
I was surprised that he was A, keen, and B, permitted to throw his hat back into the ring. Is that a mark of the Trump era, the idea that scandals that would once have ended careers don't seem to anymore?
Well, Andrew Cuomo's own scandals did look rather pathetic compared to the ones, given that Donald Trump was found in court to have, sexually assaulted E. Jean Carroll, for example. So it did seem rather small beer. On the other hand, it's not just about whether or not Andrew Cuomo was tainted by those scandals, but whether he represented the old Democratic establishment. And I think basically people are saying it's time for a new guard. The Democratic National Committee, I should say, has also been roiled by a kind of youthquake, because people on the left are feeling very angry about deferring to the wisdom of their elders. They felt that they were led by the nose by Joe Biden, and then rallied behind Kamala Harris, but didn't ultimately prevail. And now they're looking for new ways to take on Donald Trump. And Zohran Mamdani has the support of Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, young radical, and of course the veteran old radical Bernie Sanders.
Oh yeah, I was going to. You've just answered my next question. Actually, I presumed that Bernie Sanders would have provided an endorsement of this. Just for British listeners, how big a job is Mayor of New York?
It's huge. It's a national job. I mean, think about how it propelled Rudy Giuliani to national fame, at a time of 9/11. Of course, it's the biggest, most prosperous city in America. It's the financial center of the world, and it's got an explicitly anti-capitalist candidate now standing for mayor. He may not win, by the way.
Yes.
Yeah, he could win. Certainly the Democratic candidates usually win, and the opposition is very split. So Andrew Cuomo is thinking about throwing his hat in the ring as an independent. So, by the way, is the rather discredited current mayor of New York, who has Donald Trump's, who has been sort of bending the knee to Donald Trump somewhat. So the whole situation's a bit of a mess. The Republican candidate is an old guardian angel vigilante called Curtis Sliwa, who is now thinking, well, if he can just get to 30% of the vote, maybe the Democrats will be so split between the current mayor, Eric Adams, Andrew Cuomo, Zohran Mamdani, and, anyone who wants to throw their hat in the ring, anything could happen.
Oh, yes. Well, I suppose we now understand why the old line about wishing that you lived in interesting times was actually intended as a curse by the ancient Chinese, as opposed to a sort of an upbeat analysis. Exciting times, though, for people on the left of New York politics, because Zohran Mamdani, as you say, appears to be the real deal, coming very much from the Bernie Sanders and AOC school of radicalism. When is the election? Final question. When do we actually get the...
Well, that's not for a long while yet. So that's not till the autumn. So he's got time to really get known. I mean, in his favour, from being an unknown to maybe being someone through a ranked choice system who could break through, he ended up being very charming, I think, to everybody he met. And that's why I'm saying we don't know whether he's the new Barack Obama. He's got a similar kind of community organizer background. Obama was also very radical in his youth.
Yes.
Whether he's going to, what kind of path is he going to walk? But right now, he is an extremely radical choice for New Yorkers.
Thank you very much indeed, Sarah Baxter from the Marie Colvin Center in New York, also a columnist for the I newspaper. I mean, our politics is, I wouldn't say it was dull necessarily at the moment. It's a bit plodding, isn't it? We've got a sort of managerial prime minister in place, a populist leading the opposition, and an uber populist sort of, at the moment, are beating both of them in the polls. But the American situation with the midterms just around the corner is possibly going to be more significant, more interesting than ours in the next couple of years. We may as well hear from him. I didn't realise he was quite as radical as Sarah just explained. This is the Democrat candidate for the New York mayoral race, Zohran Mamdani.
Tonight, we made history. In the words of Nelson Mandela, it always seems impossible until it is done. An hour ago, I spoke with Andrew Cuomo about the need to bring this city together as he called me to concede the race. Today, 8 months after launching this campaign, with the vision of a city that every New Yorker could afford, we have won.
You can see why that was a welcome, if you like, corrective to the old school Democrat movement that had presented something of a Hobson's choice to its own members. I'm going to close today, I've got a clip of Andrew Cuomo, but I don't think he's the man of the moment. I thought we'd just listen to Steve Bannon, of all people, talking about Benjamin Netanyahu, because Noga Tarnopolsky's characteristically brilliant analysis earlier pointed out, and Bannon, of course, still has Trump's ear, that the age-old perception of having an Israeli prime minister and an American president in absolute lockstep with each other does, for whatever reason, appear to be over.
Have the gall, particularly of what this guy did for you and the grief he's taken over here. You had the gall when he said, this is what I've done, and I need you to be a partner. I need you to stand down. First, here's why I can't stand. I can't stop at all, which is another lie of the many lies we've gotten from the Netanyahu government. A bald-faced lie. Well, then he says, okay, I need you to stand down. I can't have any scale. If you can't get some guys back, it's fine. Goes to bed, gets a couple hours sleep, wakes up, and you lied to him. That's why he's furious. That's as mad as I've ever seen the President of the United States. And think about it. How did you get his anger like that, given everything he's done for you and the pressure he's under and a couple hours sleep? Now he's got in a frickin' plane and fly for, 6-8 hours? To sit down with this crowd at NATO, which you know he's just wildly enthusiastic about doing that. And plus putting himself going in the air at a time when you're in a shooting conflict in the world, putting his life at risk to do that. And this is what he gets. This is the thanks he gets. Don't sit there and don't glaze him. Netanyahu goes on Israeli TV and glazes him. Don't glaze him. Don't slobber all over him. It doesn't mean anything. You showed what you really thought of him last night. Oh, President Trump's the greatest. You showed exactly your appreciation last night. You showed exactly. And do I see any of the Baghdad Bob equivalents, the Tel Aviv Levins or any of this crowd today calling him out? They never call out Netanyahu, who got Israel into this. And for supporters of Israel, which is kind of on the ropes about this, it makes it very hard when your top guy's dealing from the bottom of the deck and is not straight. And in fact, not only not straight, he's a bald-faced liar. If you support Israel and you love Israel and you want to see Israel not just survive but thrive, you better be asking hard questions. You better be asking hard questions. You better be asking hard questions and demanding straight answers.
Bannon is a hideous individual. Don't make any mistake about that. I don't know who that was singing in the background. Was it you, Asmamir? Was that? Can you not do that, please?
I can't help myself.
Just outrageous behaviour. and of course he's a convicted fraudster and a felon. I mean, the idea that he now gets to call other people liars is just an illustration of what we were talking about when we opened the programme, about how everything's broken and the truth doesn't seem to get a look in anymore. But I thought it was significant because it speaks to a fairly a major shift in American, US-Israeli relations. And that is it from me for today. You can listen back on Catch Up on both Global Player and the LBC app, where you can stay up to date on all the top stories and opinions and put your news categories in the order you want. You can pause and rewind live radio as well as listen to a range of podcasts. Download the official LBC app for free from your app store now. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now, standing in for Sheila Fogarty, it's time for Asma Mir.
James O'Brien on LBC.